Morning everybody, it is 7 o'clock. You're very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. A train wreck or a bold move to stop pouring money into the wrong project? In the next few moments we'll speak to the Transport Secretary about Rishi Sunak's decision to cancel HS2 to Manchester. Thursday, 5th of October. Storming the stage, Just Stop Oil shot down a performance of Les Miserables in London's West End. Scientists say that September was the hottest on record by an extraordinary amount. Plus, queuing for baby milk, the families struggling to feed their children and resorting to desperate measures. One of Britain's biggest lenders, Metro Bank, is trying to raise hundreds of millions of pounds to shore up its balance sheet.
I've never been the best at anything. I've just worked really, really hard.
Victoria Beckham opens up about her early relationship with David, breaking into the fashion industry and being bullied at school. And Freddie Flintoff speaks publicly for the first time since his crash on Top Gear, telling England's cricketers they're part of a family.
Share the good times with you, the successes. But as I found over the past few months, we learn the hardest times of your life that will stand next to you.
Good morning. Just Stop Oil protesters stopped the show at Les Miserables in London's West End last night. They stormed the stage during the song Do You Hear the People Sing and were greeted with a hail of boos when they tried to address the audience. The activists then locked themselves to the set, which led to the evacuation of the theatre. Saba has more.
Les Miserables had a miserable ending. Just Stop Oil disrupting the famous West End production about revolution. 4 activists stormed the stage with their banners moments before the interval at the climax of One Day More, a song about hope in the face of adversity. But what came next was far from hopeful. The protesters went on to lock themselves to the set using bike locks. The show was inevitably stopped and the audience were evacuated from the Sondheim Theatre. Unlucky for fans, some paying hefty amounts to see the iconic show.
For me, it was a little bit disappointing because I was really waiting for this show.
In the middle of the song about revolution, in the middle of the protest, we got an actual protest. I think it's brilliant.
The theatrics, however, came with a serious message. One of the protesters has said in a statement, Rishi Sunak's just approved Rosebank, a new oil project in the North Sea. It will lead to hundreds of thousands of deaths due to starvation as crops fail in the increasingly extreme weather conditions. It goes on to say, am I not like Jean Valjean, that's the play's protagonist, justified in breaking the law to oppose this criminal government and its murderous policies? So far, 5 people have been arrested. And while the theatre says it supports freedom of expression, it stresses not at the expense of their customers. Saba Chowdhury, Sky News.
Other news, last month was the hottest September ever recorded. Scientists use words like crazy and whopping and bizarre to describe the record-breaking temperatures right around the world. Let's get more with Victoria standing by for us now. And it's set to be hot again this weekend.
Yes, very hot, about 25 degrees in some parts of the country on Saturday. But September was really extraordinary. We've just heard some of the language that have come from scientists who are usually pretty measured about these things. And that's because, not just because September was hot, but it's the margin by which it broke previous records, around half a degree. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're thinking globally, that's a huge jump, actually. And that comes off the back of record heat in June, in July, in August, record hot summer. The reasons for this, they're saying primarily it's climate change. You know, we've warmed the planet by about 1.2 degrees already. It's also to do with some natural weather variability. You know, some people might be thinking it's the weather, it changes, and to some extent they're right. It does change. Some years are hot, some years are cool. We've also got an El Nino weather pattern. That's one of the sort of prevailing weather patterns in the world, and it's a warm year this year because of that. But as I say, because we had all of these record heat records broken this summer, that's partly why we saw some really extreme weather with the flooding in New York, the fires in Greece and Canada, heat waves all over. And while they may not necessarily be caused by climate change, it's creating the conditions that makes them worse. So the scientists are also saying, unfortunately, this is a bit of a taste of what we can expect in future with more warming.
OK, Vinay, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Looking at other news for you, parents struggling with the rising cost of living, facing a shortage of baby formula in Britain's baby banks. Many have been forced to ration how much they give to families each month. 300 baby banks have now formed an alliance to try to put pressure on the government and push for meaningful change. Here's Tom with more.
I'm thinking we might be quite busy this week.
If you can, leave your prams and pushchairs upstairs, it makes it quicker. Welcome to Grow Baby.
We pray for the formula for the wipes.
At this church in Swindon, they pray for formula milk because they know there isn't enough for everyone in the queue. The fairest thing to do now is to ration it.
When that table behind you empties out, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking, great, what will I say to the next family that comes in desperately in need of formula? And I have to say, I'm so sorry, we've just run out. What happens to them then?
And that's every week, that conversation?
That's every week, yeah.
It's like she's 4 months, nearly 5 months now.
Ivy's mum, Kayla, can't quite believe she's at the church baby bank. She's on maternity leave from her job. Her partner works, but they still struggle to keep up with the cost of formula.
Literally a milk crisis. It makes me feel so angry and irritated that parents are forced to feel ashamed that they can't afford milk for their babies and that the government aren't listening. They're not doing anything.
What would you say to someone who is in a position to make a difference with this?
Help. Please help. Don't sit there and judge and look and ponder. Just do it. It's as simple as that.
In Scotland, they are examining whether struggling families can be given cash to help out. But in the rest of the UK, there's little change.
We do cover Newcastle, but by far our biggest areas are Gateshead and Sunderland and South Tyneside.
In the northeast of England, we were invited to join the first meeting of a new movement, the Baby Bank Alliance.
These people aren't a number. These are families, these are children.
Their aim is to bring together 300 baby banks across the nation who are facing unprecedented demand.
It feels quite fragile, the whole safety net that you all provide.
Yeah, it is. By working with the Alliance, and one of the things I'm hoping to get from this is taking it further, taking it to the policymakers, the decision makers, because when the prevention happens, you'll see a change in the community in terms of the response that's needed.
The Westminster government insists they are providing significant support to families. But the UK's baby banks and the parents they're trying to help would disagree. Tom Parmenter, Sky News.
Looking at some of today's other headlines on The Breakfast Show for you now. Thursday morning, a court's heard how an 18-month-old boy had 70 visible injuries when he died in a caravan in Herne Hill in Kent in November of 2020. There's little Alfie Phillips, his mum and her former partner on trial for murder, which they deny. Teenage girl is in a coma after she was physically attacked by Iranian authorities for not wearing a hijab. Human rights organisations Hengor say 16-year-old Armita Garavan suffered severe injuries at the hands of the so-called morality police. In northeast India, at least 14 people have been killed and a further 102 missing after flash flooding. The water swamped several towns, washed away a bridge and submerged army camps. Eurostar staff are on alert due to a bed bug infestation in Paris. The invasive insects have been spotted in homes, cinemas, hospitals and on trains, although one government minister has insisted there is no outbreak on Paris's public transport network. Remember, of course, that they are hosting the next Olympics. Victoria Beckham has opened up about her life in a new interview with NBC. She talks about her early relationship with David, breaking into the fashion industry and being bullied at school.
I've never been the best at anything. I've just worked really, really hard. I remember being at dancing college, phoning my mum, crying, I want to come home. My dad then got on the phone and said, absolutely not. You stay there, you work hard. I was bullied a lot. I often talk to Harper about that. I say, you know, if there's a little girl on her own in the playground, that little girl was mummy, and that hurts.
Let's talk about what's happening with Metro Bank. Mark is here for Developing Story.
Yeah, that's right, Kay. Slightly surprisingly, there's been no stock exchange announcement in the last few minutes from Metro Bank. We were reporting last night that the company, which is a relative newcomer in British high street banking, and was only founded after the last financial crisis, but it's run into lots of financial difficulties since then. We were reporting last night that it is drawing up plans to raise hundreds of millions of pounds in new capital. What does that mean? That means that they want to sell new shares to investors, and they also need to go to the debt markets and raise and borrow more money in that way as well. And the reason for this is that Metro Bank has run into trouble with the banking regulators. It's not allowed to switch to a cheaper model in terms of the way that it holds capital against its mortgage assets, and that's caused it a problem. Its shares have halved in the last month alone, and they're now down by over 95% from their peak in 2018. At one point, Metro Bank was worth £3.5 billion. This morning, the whole company is worth less than £100 million. So it needs to raise this capital. And the problem it's going to have, Kay, in terms of selling these new shares, is that the market value of the company, as I say, less than £100 million. It wants to raise at least that much again by selling new shares. That's a tall order. There are other options that its board can look at, such as selling mortgage assets. They could try to sell the entire company as well, but it's a situation that the banking regulators are monitoring very closely for obvious reasons. We haven't had many banks running into trouble since the great crash of 2008 and 2009. The Co-op Bank was the last big high street lender to run into trouble. I suspect that we will hear more over the coming weeks about the progress of these efforts by Metro Bank to raise more money.
What does it mean if you've got a mortgage with them or you're a saver with them?
Well, I mean, don't forget that savers in UK banks are guaranteed up to the first £85,000 of their savings. There is no suggestion, I should be really clear about this, that Metro Bank is in any imminent danger, that it's at risk of collapse, but its board is working hard to raise this new money, and it will need to do so and demonstrate to the regulators that it's capable of doing so and running its business efficiently in future.
OK. You're a Spurs fan, aren't you?
No, I'm a Charlton fan.
Are you?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. Are you also a cricket fan?
I am a big cricket fan.
Oh, OK. Yeah. Did you see Andrew Flintoff has been speaking?
Yes, absolutely.
Let's share with our viewers what he said.
This changes your life. It's one of them things is before and after it. This enables you to walk taller, move faster, play with passion, play with pride, play with belief, and also part of a family of people that share the good times with you, the successes. But as I found over the past few months, we learn the hardest times of your life that will stand next to you.
I mean, so brave of him. That terrible accident that he had.
Yeah, awful accident, Kay, and great to see him back in a public role.
It really is. When will we hear more from Metro?
Well, I was expecting perhaps that we would hear something from the company this morning. It hasn't happened yet. We'll keep on top of it during the course of the day. OK,
I'm glad you're not a Spurs fan. We can still be friends.
Thank you.
Other news for you. One of the last British home children survivors in Canada has told Sky News that their dying wish is to receive an apology from the Canadian government for their role in the migration scheme. Between 1860 and 1948, Britain sent 100,000 children over the Atlantic, many of them orphans, with a promise of a better life. But on arrival, many suffered hardship and abuse. Here's James.
There'll be bluebirds over.
On his 100th birthday, they sang Georgie's favourite song.
Just you wait and see.
George Beardshaw is one of Canada's last surviving British home children, youngsters from orphan institutions who were shipped from the UK as cheap labour. Their story casts a shadow to this day.
I know a lot of people thought we were the scum of the earth. Britain was sending over some of the scum, you know, from off the streets of London, you know.
This was George when he sailed to Canada in 1938. He was among more than 100,000 British home children sent to work typically on farms and as domestic servants. They were routinely overworked and many were abused.
Some pitchforks through them. Some slept in the barn with the cattle. I know all that stuff right there.
In the corner of a Toronto cemetery stands a memorial to British home children whose remains were found in unmarked graves. Laurie Olszewski is founder of the charity Home Children Canada.
They knew what was going on with the kids. They knew about the horrific treatment.
She wants the country to apologise for its treatment of British child migrants, following the example of the UK and Australia.
You know, it's recognition that what was done to these children was wrong.
Charles and Camilla.
George Beardshaw has received birthday wishes from a British king and queen.
Mr. Trudeau.
And Justin Trudeau, Canadian Prime Minister. Some of the home children would say that Justin Trudeau should be making an apology to the home children. What do you think?
Oh, yes, maybe, yes, yeah. Oh, I think so, yeah.
Canada's Parliament has passed a motion of apology, but none has been forthcoming from the government itself. In a statement to Sky News, it said it regretted the children's suffering and abuse, but the statement contained no apology.
Mr. Trudeau, does your government owe an apology to the British home children?
Great to see you, sir.
Does your government owe them an apology?
No.
Happy birthday to you.
If sorry is the hardest word, it comes with a hard reality. Those who've waited longest for it can't wait forever. James Matthews, Sky News, in London, Ontario.
Ah, lovely. Waiting for the Transport Secretary, no idea where he is. If you see him, can you tell him he's supposed to be on the telly? Gives us an opportunity, though, to talk in a bit more detail about what's happening with Freddie Flintoff-Ivers here, as you can see. He has kept himself to himself, really, hasn't he?
He has, yeah. And I think this video that's surfaced really explains why, because it's been a very difficult time for him. We didn't have many details about this crash that he had. So it happened last December when he was filming for Top Gear. He used to be England cricket captain, of course, big figure ahead of the team. Now a successful TV presenter. And we knew he was airlifted to hospital. We knew he suffered facial injuries. And this was the first time we saw him since the crash. This was in September.
Yeah.
A full 9 months after the crash. So clearly the facial injuries must be pretty bad for them still to be evident at this point.
Bless him.
He also suffered several broken ribs and then became part of the England coaching setup. And then this video surfaced from last month as well, where he's talking about it and he refers to it as the hardest time of his life these last few months. And I think this really explains why. And it's good to see that he's kind of fighting fit again and will no doubt be back on our screens before too long.
Yeah, I don't know if we can listen to what he had to say again, but he was basically... Actually, let's just listen in his own words.
This changes your life. It's one of them things is before and after it. This enables you to walk taller, move faster, play with passion, play with pride, play with belief, and also part of a family of people that will share the good times with you, the successes. But as I found over the past few months, we learn the hardest times of your life, they will stand next to you.
And standing next to him, shoulder to shoulder, the England team.
Yeah, so it's a video of him awarding the first cap to England's newest player, Tom Hartley.
But the team, he was making the point that the team have been incredibly supportive.
Exactly. And part of the whole, he's saying you're going to be part of this family, and he refers to them being supportive to him, as you say, over the last few months.
Yeah.
They're with you during the good times, but also the bad times. The hardest time of his life, he said.
And do we know what happened with the accident?
The details are still pretty hazy. So it happened at this aerodrome in Surrey during this filming for Top Gear. The rest of the series was actually cancelled. There was an investigation. We don't know the full details yet, I don't think. But obviously it was reported to the Health and Safety Executive, as it has to be.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's been anything since then to follow up.
OK, well, it's good to see that he is back in the public gaze and talking about the support that he's been receiving from his colleagues at the England cricket team. For now, thanks very much, Ivor. Thank you. Quick look at what's still to come on the programme, 7:30, talking about how baby banks are being forced to ration baby milk to struggling families. Prime Minister's saying it's common sense that men are men and women are women. Get the view of a young trans woman on that. 9:45, we'll look at how the right diet can help women age in a healthy way during menopause, after a report showed that many aren't aware what nutrients they need. Before that, though, quick look at the papers. The Times reporting that Rishi Sunak is setting himself against his recent Tory predecessors as he pledged to break with the old consensus. The Financial Times says scrapping the northern leg of HS2 is Sunak's bid to paint the Tories as a party of change. Guardian reports that the Prime Minister has ignited a civil war in his party after scrapping the northern leg of HS2. While the Daily Mail is calling the Prime Minister's announcements a bold and radical policy blitz to transform Britain. And in the Eye, the PM promises to reinvest the money saved from scrapping HS2 in other rail projects. Mari's here. Hello, sorry, I've got the conference cold, I think. Oh, it's a winner, isn't it? We were in the car.
One of the cabinet ministers would have given it to you.
Well, not the Transport Secretary. I have no idea where he is, but I'm sure he'll get to us when he's got time. We were talking in the car, weren't we, on the way back yesterday on the motorway, because we were listening to the PM's speech. What stood out for you?
What stood out for me was, first of all, the things that were not in that speech. There wasn't very much about the NHS and social care. We know there was an original promise from Boris Johnson to fix social care. Then that was abandoned when Liz Truss scrapped that NI rise that was going to pay for it. We didn't hear very much about social care, and we know that social care is really, to an extent, one of the keys to unlocking the potential of the NHS, because there's lots of bed blocking where people don't need to be in the NHS anymore, but they can't get out because there isn't the social care available. So I think that was one thing that was missing. Also, we know that Rishi Sunak is very, very keen on technology, on AI. We've got an AI summit coming up next month that we are hosting here in the UK. And again, we didn't hear very much at all about AI and technology and how that could really impact or improve certain state spending, essentially. What was interesting was he wanted to focus on education and he wanted to focus on, you know, this new potential British baccalaureate, as it were. What's interesting is Keir Starmer has also said that education is going to be one of his very, very top priorities. So they are almost battling out on the same battlefield when it comes to that top priority. So the question now is also, when we get to Liverpool, where we'll be up there, how will Labour respond to the I love a lift, Nick. How would Keir Starmer respond to the HS2 announcement? Is he going to stick to it like originally Labour said they would? Or are they going to see that and think, actually, you know what, it's too expensive, we're going to have to go with Sunak?
OK.
That will be interesting.
Let's hear what Mark Harper has to say, the Transport Secretary, should we? We found him, he's there. It's good to see you, Mr Harper. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. Let's talk about HS2, obviously part of your remit. I mean, a video has emerged on the Prime Minister's Twitter feed telling us that the HS2 Northern Leg had been scrapped. It was filmed before he left Downing Street. Why didn't you just tell us that it was being scrapped rather than waiting till yesterday?
Well, look, we've been working on this whole plan for a number of weeks, as you would expect. It's a big decision and we've been working on it. I have the legal responsibility to take the decision, and I took the decision formally on Tuesday this week, and it was approved by the Cabinet on Wednesday morning and then announced by the Prime Minister at our conference. So all very straightforward, and so I don't really know why people are getting so het up with this particular issue.
Because you knew about it at the beginning of the week and you didn't tell us.
Well, we've been working on this decision it's a big decision. We've been obviously putting a huge amount of work into it. I took the formal final decision on Tuesday, and it was agreed by the Cabinet at its meeting on Wednesday morning and then announced properly by the Prime Minister to the country in his conference speech.
So why did he record a video saying it was scrapped when it hadn't been?
Well, we did lots of work in advance. We published a document yesterday. We laid a command paper in Parliament setting all the details out. That's obviously been being worked on. These are big decisions. We put a lot of work into them. That work was obviously done in advance, but the decision was taken this week on Tuesday by me, and agreed by the Cabinet and set out by the Prime Minister in his speech. All very straightforward.
Why did he say it had been scrapped when it hadn't then? Because you said the decision was only made on Tuesday. This was filmed at least before last Sunday.
Well, Kay, we published a document yesterday, laid a come-on paper before Parliament, which had been worked on, and clearly that had been worked on in advance. You do work in advance, and then you take a formal decision, which I did on Tuesday, and the Cabinet agreed on Wednesday, and then we set it out. Now, look, we can keep going around this circle if you want. I've been very clear about what happened and the details, and I'm very happy to answer the substantive questions about the decision we made for your viewers.
Minister, with due respect, I do the questions. If you don't mind, I'll decide what I'm asking you during this 8 minutes that we have with you. David Cameron, George Osborne both think it's a ludicrous decision.
Yes, and they're absolutely entitled to their opinion. I worked closely with both of them in government and was very proud to serve with them. But that was a number of years ago. The facts have changed. The costs of the project have escalated. The patterns of travel have changed post-pandemic. So facts have changed. So this government's taken a different decision. The Prime Minister's taken a different decision that he thinks and I think is in the interests of the country about cancelling HS2, the second phase, saving the £36 billion that we were due to spend on that project and investing every penny in transport infrastructure across the North, the Midlands and the rest of the country on projects which we think will deliver better value for the taxpayer, better outcomes for the people of our country, and that's a decision I'm proud of. The Prime Minister said
And what
in his
about
speech,
if those projects
said,
overrun
difficult decision,
and are more expensive? Will you cancel those as well?
Well, look, the Prime Minister in his speech, just finishing the previous point, said that he knew this was a difficult decision. He knew some people, including in our own party, wouldn't agree with it, but he wanted to make the decisions that he thinks are right for the country. That's leadership, and that's what he set out yesterday. On your question about other projects, look, we will manage those carefully. There's a range of projects across the country. There's some rail projects, road projects, and in fact, as soon as next month, people will see the benefit from the money we're now able to invest in keeping the £2 bus fare cap across England, which is helping some of the lowest paid who depend on the most popular form of public transport to get around, get to work and to live their lives.
OK. Let me play our viewers this from yesterday. This is what the Prime Minister said as part of his speech.
A man is a man and a woman is a woman. That's just common sense.
Did you cheer with the rest of the hall when he said that?
Yes, I did. I think most people think that was a fairly straightforward statement of the obvious.
Interesting, because I've taken the opportunity to look at the Equality Act 2010 this morning, which says that people who are going through a gender reassignment should not be discriminated against, and you can be at any stage in the transition process. So actually what he said is against the law.
No, not at all. I think what you're doing there is mixing up sex and gender. He was being very clear that you can't change your sex. Of course you can change your gender, and there are very clear processes for doing that, and we've always been very clear about treating people with respect and kindness. But getting into this sort of debate where we have these ridiculous things where, for example, we just insist on refusing to talk about women, we don't have safe women-only spaces, for example, in refuges, that is not acceptable, very controversial, and I think you've got to balance the rights of different groups of people and protect the rights of women, hard-fought rights over many years, which many women think are under threat.
What's the difference between gender and sex, sorry?
Well, sex can't be changed, gender can be. I think that's very clear in the Equality Act. I was in Parliament, I was the shadow spokesman when that was going through Parliament. I think that's very clear. The Prime Minister set out a very common sense definition yesterday, which I think would have been supported by the overwhelming people in the country, men and women alike.
But it's against the law. The Equality Act 2010 says if you're going through gender reassignment, in other words, if you're going from being a woman to a man or the other way round, you cannot, you are protected by the Equalities Act 2010. The Prime Minister is saying, no, that's not the case, you're either one or the other.
No, he was talking about sex. You can't change that. You're talking about gender. He was very clear. All of the legal protections for people remain in place, and nothing he said changed that at all. He was being very straightforward. I think most people listening to his speech yesterday will have thought he was spot on and wouldn't see anything wrong with anything he said at all.
OK, you should read some of the papers this morning, Mr Harper. Before I let you go, let me ask you about our report this morning about baby milk. And the fact that some people literally can't afford baby milk and going to baby banks in order to get baby formula because they can't afford it to feed their babies. What's the government going to do about that?
Well, look, there are obviously pressures on household budgets. That's why the government made sure in the budget that we uprated benefits for people on the lowest incomes, both in work and out of work, by the rate of inflation. It's why the taxpayer paid half of people's energy bills last year, and it's why we've got the universal credit system to make sure we protect people, whether they're out of work and looking for work or hard-working families that need extra support, and why the Chancellor set out in his speech a significant increase, accepting the recommendation of the Low Pay Commission for an increase in the national living wage to help hard-working families who are at work. So I think this government's done a lot to support people, but I think what you're highlighting there is that the best tax cut we can deliver for people this year is to deliver on our pledge to halve inflation, to reduce the rise in prices, and we're on track to do that. That's the best way, I think, to help hard-working families like the sort that you're talking about.
OK, good to talk to you. Thanks, Minister. Thank you. Murray's still here. He's had his 3 Weetabix this morning, hasn't he? Sex refers to the different biological and physiological characteristics of males and females, such as reproductive organs. Gender refers to the socially constructed characteristics of men and women. Apparently.
I think what's really interesting is the government are very keen to have this fight about trans rights because, first of all, it's cheap. They can try and win political points without spending very much money when money is tight. And so having this kind of war on woke, as they like to call it, is a way that they can try and dominate some of the headlines and actually send some kind of red meat to the party members, as Rishi Sunak was realistically doing yesterday. In the speech yesterday, his comment about men and women being men and women had the loudest cheer out of everything he said in the entire speech. And they know that, and they know that it appeals to a certain voter base in the Conservative Party that they need to keep on side. And, as I said, it doesn't cost very much for them to do that. So they are keen to have that fight.
And his comments on HS2?
OK, so...
And when they made the decision?
Yes. So, first of all, that video is really interesting because, as you pointed out, realistically, it was obviously filmed before party conference, which means the announcement was already taken before then. Now, the government's line would be, we film things all the time that don't necessarily get used. We just film them just in case and see if we need them. But it'd be interesting...
For a £100 billion project.
Exactly. And it would be interesting to find out if they filmed the other version of keeping HS2.
I'm sure you asked them.
I did ask them, and they said they weren't sure.
OK, so no then.
So it sounds like potentially a no. But also what Mark Harper was saying about HS2, when you pressed him on the fact that these new initiatives are coming through instead of the northern leg of HS2, if they run over budget wildly the way HS2 did, will they be cancelled? He didn't have an answer to that. And I think that will be the danger for a lot of northern and Midland communities is, can we really believe this? We've seen rail promises and transport promises before, and then they've been delayed or they've been binned. How do we know for sure this is really going to go ahead? If costs continue to spiral, we don't know what's going to happen with inflation, for instance.
Okay. Murray, for now, thanks very much indeed. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go.
To fly, to fly.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The weekend looking unseasonably warm, but the next couple of days will be cooler with rain in the north and the west. Mostly mild now, although chilly in the northeast. But rain over Ireland and Northern Ireland is spreading into northwestern Britain. That rain will spread to all but South Wales and central, southern and eastern England this morning, while the northwestern half of Ireland will dry up.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Just heard the Transport Secretaries representing the government this morning say the best way to help parents who can't afford baby milk is to cut inflation. More on that after the break.
They've pushed the protesters further back here. There's around 200 or 300 still remaining.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
This van goes onto the streets of Plymouth 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
These facilities at the moment are a lifesaver. It's all we've got.
From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region, hearing from people who have real stories.
I'm gonna have nowhere to live for about 3 or 4 months.
There are still people inside the properties here.
They're coming from the epicentre of what is now a global health pandemic. We were seeing and speaking to young women who were selling themselves right on the high street. It was desperately sad, and the fact it was happening right in the heart of this community. Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight.
What's your feeling about the future then?
Bleak. Might all be finished, I don't know.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Let's talk in more detail, hello again, about the story that we've been covering this morning, struggles facing parents of newborns as cost of living rises. Let's get more on that, should we? Bianca Sokol, founder of Sebi's Corner Baby Bank. Hi, it's good to see you. How big a problem is that?
It's big and it's getting bigger. So we were looking at some figures before we came here, and we've seen a 92% increase in the number of families coming to us for formula in the past year.
And why is that?
It's the cost of living is really the biggest factor. So everything's gone up, but the cost of formula's gone up now as well. So, you know, the average box of formula can be £14, £15 a box.
Wow.
If you're looking at a specialist formula, your baby's got reflux, £18, £19 a box.
Wow.
You know, these families are living off £20, £30 a week for everything. So how do you make that work?
Is it because of the raw ingredients increasing, or is it because the companies realise that they can charge this sort of money?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is, isn't it?
And we would really like to push for some answers to that question, and some kind of government help. You know, the help that's out there is not enough. We're seeing that every day. You know, you have mums and dads coming to us in tears because they can't feed their babies, and it's a horrible situation to be in, and we just want to help, but we need help to help them.
Doesn't the government need to look at the cost? I mean, baby formula's always been expensive, let's be honest, but it's gone up significantly more than other raw ingredients. Does the government need to look at that?
Absolutely. They need to look at why it's happening. Should there be a cap? You know, can there be more help for families? You know, when we've pushed this before, we get told, well, there's the Healthy Start scheme. But the uptake of that and the access for that, it's not enough, you know? We have to do something now. We're in a formula crisis, you know, and it's the babies that are, families that are being affected the most.
And it's not just the cost, it's also the availability. I saw quite recently in the US, actually, they had big issues of actually being able to get hold of formula. Why is there a shortage?
So we don't really know the answer to that. One thing that we have been told is that families that can stock up. Once there becomes, you know, rumours of a shortage, the families that can will stock up, and the families that can't not only can't afford it, but even if they could, they can't get access to it. So something really needs to be done, and urgently.
So what do these baby banks, your baby banks, do?
So we get families who can't afford to buy essentials for their children. They come to us and we give them what we call a shop experience. So they come round and we support them with taking the items that they need, whether that's nappies, formula, you know, and we make sure that they have everything that their baby needs to thrive.
Yeah, I've worked in food banks previously, and we didn't supply baby formula and we didn't supply nappies because you can't get hold of them easily and they're very expensive.
Yeah, so we do. We are different from a food bank, we're a baby bank. Not all baby banks give out formula. We do because we are passionate about it, and we appreciate that if you can't get a formula at a food bank, and you're coming to a baby bank, that baby needs to get formula from somewhere. Yeah. But it costs a lot of money, and the formula companies aren't even allowed to donate formula to us because it's against legislation.
Is it? Why?
We had a formula company donate a pallet of formula to us when we were running really low, and they said to us, please, we're delighted to help you. You can't tell anyone about it because we're not really meant to be doing this. And that is crazy. That's what we need to look at.
That's something the government needs to look at as well.
Absolutely. I appreciate all the legislation is there to keep babies safe, but some of it is just red tape. And if it's stopping us from helping the families get it into the families that need it, then something needs to be looked at.
I wish I'd known that before the Minister was on. I will certainly put that to the next one. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot for the update. In other news, Prime Minister has been reported to the police, it's not going well, is it, for a joke he made about Nicola Sturgeon during his conference speech. The former First Minister of Scotland, currently subject of a live police investigation.
Nicola Sturgeon wanted to go down in the history books as the woman who broke up our country, but it now looks like she may go down for very different reasons.
Well, Christopher McElhenney is the General Secretary of Scotland's Alba Party. He made that complaint. He's with us now. Hi. Why did you report him to Police Scotland?
Well, because the Prime Minister's got a very serious job, and I think it's unacceptable that he wants to, make crass jokes which potentially interfere with a live police investigation. And it's a very important police investigation to people in Scotland. I think Police Scotland should be allowed to fearlessly pursue the facts without, having to sit in their offices under pressure because the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom's making jokes about their investigation on TV at his party conference. And more fool him, because if he had made those comments in Parliament, he would have been protected by privilege. But because he chose to make them at his party conference, then he's now liable for a contempt of court under Scots law.
Yeah, I have to say, I was surprised when he said it because I wondered whether he might be in contempt. But it was just a quip, wasn't it?
Well, I don't think he's got a very good speechwriter. I'd make that point because, it wasn't the funniest of jokes I've ever heard at party conferences. That might be an oxymoron, of course. But, the fact is, as I say, this is a ongoing police investigation. It's very important. It goes to some of the most important issues that you could possibly have at the heart of our democracy in Scotland. People deserve to know the facts. People deserve who are accused or under investigation or under arrest deserve to, have the full protections in terms of the presumption to innocence until proven guilty. And I just don't think it helps that the Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is beaming on our television screens, effectively interfering with an ongoing police investigation. He's already a law-breaking Prime Minister, of course, parting through lockdown. And if Police Scotland take this complaint forward, he may well be interviewed and he may well, again, be a law-breaking Prime Minister.
How soon after the comment did you report the Prime Minister to the police?
Well, I was, watching a lot of the commentary. I've seen a lot of people are getting quite aggrieved at it because the reality is, there are issues that need to be addressed and the facts must come out eventually. But we don't need a British Prime Minister trying to tell us how to manage our own affairs in Scotland, particularly when Scots law is completely separate from English and Welsh law. So as the day went on, and I did see there was quite a volume of opinion in Scotland that this clearly was a contempt of court, I then early last night made the complaint to Police Scotland.
OK, whose views did you seek before you reported him?
I didn't seek the views of anyone. I sat and monitored social media commentary. I've seen that many people had, expressed great concern. Politicians across the political spectrum in Scotland, from the Alba Party, the SNP, even from the Labour they all thought it was a crass comment, and they all thought it was a potential contempt of court, as did many of your colleagues in the Fourth Estate, who said that they wouldn't have dared to say that on TV because they knew themselves they would have been committed.
Just before I let you go, Chris, sorry, we're almost out of time. What did the police say to you?
I'm still waiting on a response.
Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Other news, football fans are facing the prospect of travelling thousands of miles to catch World Cup matches in 2030 after it was announced the tournament would be held across 3 continents. Rob's here, what?
This is one of those behind-the-scenes deals.
It's all about their money, isn't it?
It is. All roads actually lead to 2034 and Saudi Arabia. They're trying to get the World Cup then, but before then is 2030 in the World Cup. And there had been these joint bids from South America as well as from Spain, Morocco and Portugal. And what have FIFA done? Rather than having rivals, they're going to put them together. So it means 6 countries, 3 continents for the World Cup.
Unbelievable. So what do they expect fans to do?
Well, only 3 games will be in South America. That's one note of caution. It'll be the opening games, 1 each in Uruguay, Paraguay and Argentina to mark 100 years since the start of the World Cup. Then teams are going to have...
was the first game?
In Uruguay.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. And then it'll be off to Europe, so Morocco will get a World Cup for the first time, but it will pose all sorts of logistical challenges, lots of travel for the teams and for the fans. And while we're talking about the 2030 Men's World Cup and even the 2034 World Cup, with that process opened and only Asia able to bid, which opens the door for Saudi Arabia, FIFA are yet to decide where the 2027 Women's World Cup will even be yet.
Get your act together, guys. OK, for now. Thanks very much indeed, Rob. Thank you. Still to come, Rishi Sunak says it's just common sense that men are men and women are women. We'll speak to a young trans woman coming next.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
There's a feeling amongst some commentators that it's not the most respectful timing.
I think there's a word for it, fake news.
I mean, it's wow, wow, wow from Harry. Delving deeper into the stories with different perspectives on tomorrow's headlines.
We really haven't seen the government getting round the table and negotiating. There are no easy answers to those questions.
The press preview delivering you tomorrow's news tonight on Sky News.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Thursday morning, the Prime Minister set out his position on the debate around transgender people, didn't he, yesterday in his speech? This is what he said.
And we shouldn't get bullied into believing that people can be any sex they want to be. They can't. A man is a man and a woman is a woman. That's just common sense.
Well, let's see what the President of the National Union of Students in Scotland thinks about that. Trans rights campaigner Ellie Gomes has been on the programme previous. Hi, Ellie. Good to see you again. What did you make of what the Prime Minister had to say yesterday?
You know, it's not only depressing, it's actually pretty terrifying. I mean, we've seen over sort of recent years, it feels like trans rights have been rolled back and rolled back and rolled back. Because actually, you know, trans people, we've always existed. We've had protections in law. We've been able to actually legally change our sex. You know, in law for almost 20 years now, we've had protections in the Equality Act for 13 years now. But all of a sudden, in the past sort of 2 or 3 years, it feels like our rights have just been up for debate again. And it's really, really difficult because it's really clear to see that, you know, the situation around trans people haven't changed with, you know, there's not been any sort of change in circumstances, but all of a sudden, you know, politicians like now Rishi Sunak, you know, the most powerful man in the country, are using trans people, I think, to distract from the real issues. The fact that the Conservatives have been in power for 13 years, there's a general election coming up, and they want to create an issue to distract people. But what
Okay,
makes
well, let's
it
stick
so
with the subject, if we may, please, Ellie. And I was putting it to the Transport Secretary earlier, and I said, and he said, oh, there's a world of difference between sex and gender. What's the difference to you?
Well, I think that when it comes to sort of things like sex and gender, I think it is a personal thing. When it comes to sort of, you know, the vast range of sort of human experiences people have, we know that actually from even a biological perspective, that sex can be incredibly diverse. Even when we're not talking about just trans people, you know, there's about 10% of people in the country, most of whom will never even know, who don't necessarily have the sexual characteristics that you would expect to see from a man or a woman. The thing is these sort of things don't actually matter in the grand scheme of things. It doesn't actually matter what your chromosomes are. No one ever goes to check your chromosomes. But all of a sudden, we're having this big conversation, we're having this big debate. But the reality for trans people like me is that hate crime against trans people has more than doubled in recent years. When you look at the British Social Attitude Survey, which was published recently, you can see that support for trans people and support for trans rights, actually, when you go back a few years ago, just as far back as 2019, support among the general public was actually pretty high. It was well into the majority who supported, you know, trans rights and the ability for us to change our legal sex and gender and things like that. And now, actually, you know, the number of people who openly say that they're prejudiced against trans people has increased really quite significantly, almost a majority of the population. And that's terrifying as someone who has to like go out and live my life as a trans person. You know, this isn't a topic for debate at a conference for me. It's my everyday, day-to-day life. And when I see, you know, the amount of abuse that myself and other people, my friends, are getting, whether that's online or unfortunately is increasing in person now, this sort of rhetoric from the most powerful man in the country only furthers that hatred, only increases my risk of being attacked. And that's really, really scary. Earlier this year, you know, a young trans woman, a teenager was murdered. And, you know, obviously we don't want to get into sort of full details as to why you know, that happened, but clearly transphobia was an element there. And we're seeing that more and more and more across the UK.
Ellie,
and it's really
Ellie, let me
scary.
put this to you, if I may. And the Prime Minister, because we were limited on time, forgive me. The Prime Minister says, no, you're either a man or a woman. That's it. What would you say in response to him?
What I would say is that that's just not the reality. It's not the biological reality either. I'd say to the Prime Minister, speak to some scientists, speak to some people who are actually experts in this field. But the thing is that I think that Rishi Sunak actually knows this, because earlier this year, we spoke actually about, the gender recognition bill in Scotland, and the Conservatives then were saying that actually their issues with the bill were just purely because of sort of essentially logistical facts in terms of sort of Scotland and England. Now it's really clear that the Conservatives have changed their attitude, and now they're purely ideologically opposed to furthering trans rights. I think that this is a ploy by the Conservatives. I don't think that Rishi Sunak even actually believes it himself. I think he's just using it as an election device.
Ali, we are out of time, but it's good to talk to you. Can I just say that you're looking fabulous? Thanks for taking the time to join us. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Weekend looking unseasonably warm, but the next couple of days will be cooler with rain in the north and the west. Mostly mild now, although chilly in the northeast, but rain over Ireland and Northern Ireland spreading into northwestern Britain. That rain will spread to all but South Wales and central, southern and eastern England this morning, while the northwestern half of Ireland will dry up. Temperatures will be like yesterday's, but with a strengthening wind.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Do you want to see a picture of the King? OK, here we go. He's on a coin in New Zealand, I think, and this is what it looks like. We've got it for you, just coming up in just a second or two. King Charles, of course, the coronation back in May of this year. We brought that to you live here on Sky News. There you go, Charles III. It's an Australian coin, actually. It has been obviously minted earlier this year. He'll appear on 10 million $1 coins, and they'll be in circulation before Christmas. The King's effigy was designed by Royal Mint in London. Still to come on the programme for you, going to be talking in more detail about HS2. When did the government actually make that decision? Find out more in just a moment. Good morning, everybody. It is 8 o'clock and you are very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News Thursday morning. The Transport Secretary telling this programme he's proud of cancelling the Manchester leg of HS2 and people will see the benefits soon as the money is reinvested. In a few moments, we'll get a view of a Northern Mayor and whether he shares his joy. Thursday, 5th of October. Minister, with due respect, I do the questions. If you don't mind, I'll decide what I'm asking you during this 8 minutes that we have with you. David Cameron, George Osborne both think it's a ludicrous decision.
Yes, and they're absolutely entitled to their opinion.
Mark Harper insists that new northern transport projects will be managed carefully. Storming the stage, Just Stop Oil shut down a performance of Les Mis in London's West End. Queuing for baby milk, the families struggling to feed their children and resorting to desperate measures.
Never been the best at anything. I've just worked really, really hard.
Victoria Beckham opens up about her early relationship with David Beckham, breaking into the fashion industry and being bullied at school. And Freddie speaks publicly for the first time since his crash on Top Gear, telling England's cricketers they're part of a family. Morning, everybody. The Transport Secretary says he's proud of the decision to scrap the Manchester leg of HS2, saying it was in the interests of the country. I asked Mark Harper about criticism from the likes of former Prime Minister David Cameron about the decision to scrap the remaining project. He said the facts have changed, so a different decision was needed. Here's what he had to say.
We've been working on this decision it's a big decision. We've been obviously putting a huge amount of work into it. I took the formal final decision on Tuesday and it was agreed by the Cabinet at its meeting on Wednesday morning and then announced properly by the Prime Minister to the country in his conference speech.
Why did he record a video saying it was scrapped when it hadn't been?
Well, we did lots of work in advance. We published a document yesterday. We laid a command paper in Parliament setting all the details out. That's obviously been being worked on. These are big decisions. We put a lot of work into them. That work was obviously done in advance, but the decision was taken this week on Tuesday by me and agreed by the Cabinet and set out by the Prime Minister in his speech. All very straightforward.
Why did he say it had been scrapped when it hadn't then? Because you said the decision was only made on Tuesday. This was filmed at least before last Sunday.
Well, Kay, we published a document yesterday, laid a command paper before Parliament, which had been worked on, and clearly that had been worked on in advance. You do work in advance, and then you take a formal decision, which I did on Tuesday, and the Cabinet agreed on Wednesday, and then we set it out. Now, look, we can keep going around this circle if you want. I've been very clear about what happened and the details, and I'm very happy to answer the substantive questions about the decision we made for your viewers.
Minister, with due respect, I do the questions. If you don't mind, I'll decide what I'm asking you during this 8 minutes that we have with you. David Cameron, George Osborne both think it's a ludicrous decision.
Yes, and they're absolutely entitled to their opinion. I worked closely with both of them in government and was very proud to serve with them. But that was a number of years ago. The facts have changed. The costs of the project have escalated. The patterns of travel have changed post-pandemic. So facts have changed. So this government's taken a different decision. The Prime Minister's taken a different decision that he thinks and I think is in the interests of the country.
Murray's here. Murray, I mean, come on. They told us all week that no decision had been made, and it was made.
It really does seem like that, doesn't it, Kay? I just don't understand how every single day on the morning round with you on The Breakfast Show, they continue to say no decision whatsoever had been made, and we know that that video was already filmed before the conference had even started.
And he decided on Tuesday, and Cabinet agreed to it on Wednesday. He totally lied. They totally lied to me.
It gives that impression, doesn't it?
I'm furious, I'll tell you.
I mean, to an extent, they said it to all the broadcasters, so it was just us. But it's also the fact that
they lied to my face.
But also, it's the fact that, let's not forget, we are the way to relay information to the public. So by
we're a conduit.
By being disingenuous with us, it looks like they're disingenuous with the public as well, which isn't a good look.
Yeah, and the views on HS2?
Well, the views on HS2, he says, you know, George Osborne, David Cameron, Boris Johnson, they're all entitled to their opinion, you know, agree to disagree, as it were, on a legacy policy that's been announced, I think, since about 2009 or something. But what's interesting is actually, in some ways, Rishi Sunak trying to rebrand himself as this kind of reformer, you know, bashing up the status quo. In some ways, all of these former prime ministers, former chancellors, big heavyweights coming out against Sunak might be slightly useful in terms of the fact that that might be a way he can try and prove, look, they are the ones who've gone before, they are the status quo, that is why they are disagreeing with me, and now look at me disagreeing with all of them, so therefore I am a reformer, therefore I am the change candidate. So in some ways you could maybe spin it slightly that all this opposition from previous leaders could help to rebrand Rishi Sunak.
OK, and what about if all these new projects, we're going to put this to the mayor shortly, one of the mayors impacted, what about if all these new projects that they're suggesting run over in cost?
That's what everybody wants to know, because it all sounds great at the moment, all these new local projects in the north and in the Midlands, but we know that infrastructure projects tend to run over by quite a lot, historically speaking. That's why we have had the northern leg scrapped in the first place of HS2, and I think people will be wanting to know, are these projects ever really going to happen if they do run over? And what would be the limit? What would be the cut-off point where we say enough is enough? And also, we still don't know how Labour stand on HS2 yet. And would Labour come in, if they were to win an election, would they come in and completely rip up all of this infrastructure plans and start again and maybe reinstate HS2 and we'll have more turmoil? There's still a lot of uncertainty about what really is actually going to happen in the next couple of decades.
Now, I was just told, I can't remember, earlier on in the week, somebody tweeted me when I said exactly that about running over, not on time, not on budget. And apparently there was a Scottish bridge that was actually on time and on budget.
It's a miracle.
And I can't remember which one it was. I'm sure watching this morning you will let me know. Otherwise, I think it was the Queensferry crossing, apparently, over the River Forth is what my producer is telling me this morning. Okay. He's Scottish, so he would know.
He would know.
There we are. We'll see you in a little while. For now, thanks very much indeed. Let's tell you what happened in the West End last night. Just Stop Oil protesters stopped the show at Les Mis in London's West End. They stormed the stage during the song Do You Hear the People Sing? And were greeted with a hail of boos when they tried to address the audience. The activists then locked themselves to the set, which led to the evacuation of the theatre. Here's Saba.
Les Miserables had a miserable ending. Just Stop Oil disrupting the famous West End production about revolution. 4 activists stormed the stage with their banners, moments before the interval, at the climax of One Day More. A song about hope in the face of adversity. But what came next was far from hopeful. The protesters went on to lock themselves to the set using bike locks. The show was inevitably stopped and the audience were evacuated from the Sondheim Theatre. Unlucky for fans, some paying hefty amounts to see the iconic show.
For me, it was a little bit disappointing because I was really waiting for this show. In the middle of the song about revolution, in the middle of the protest, we got an actual protest. I think it's brilliant. The theatrics, however, came with a serious message. One of the protesters has said in a statement, Rishi Sunak's just approved Rosebank, a new oil project in the North Sea. It will lead to hundreds of thousands of deaths due to starvation as crops fail in the increasingly extreme weather conditions. It goes on to say, am I not like Jean Valjean, that's the play's protagonist, justified in breaking the law to oppose this criminal government and its murderous policies? So far, 5 people have been arrested. And while the theatre says it supports freedom of expression, it stresses not at the expense of their customers. Saba Chowdhury, Sky News.
That was last night. Temperatures, they've got a point, some might say, because temperatures the highest ever.
Yes, in September. So we've just had some data through overnight that has confirmed September was the hottest on record globally. And actually in the UK, it looks like some of that heat is continuing. It's going to be really warm this weekend, maybe 27 degrees in some parts
in
of the
October,
country.
my goodness.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? The record for October is actually about 29 degrees. So it doesn't look like we'll set a new record this weekend in the UK. But just going back to those figures that we had for September globally, scientists are describing it as whopping, extraordinary, huge. This is pretty bold language coming from scientists who are usually quite measured, quite cautious about these things. And that's not just because we've broken a new record, but how much we've broken it by, the margin. It's an extra ½ degree hotter than the last previous warm September, and this comes off the back. And that might not sound like all that much, ½ degree, but globally that's huge, and it comes off the back of record hot June, July, August. This year has been really outstanding, and that is partly because of, or primarily because of climate change, because emissions have warmed the planet by about 1.2 degrees, but there's an extra sort of bump on there, they're saying, which is coming from this warm weather pattern that you might have heard about called El Nino, and of course some natural weather variability, a few other things going on. Some years are hot, some years are cold. There are some other factors. The weather does change after all, but this heat really explains why we've had some of these extreme events that we've, and some extraordinary picture that we've seen on the TV over the summer, the fires in Greece and Canada, the flooding in New York, lots of heat waves, and that's because although some of these things might have happened anyway, this underlying extra heat from climate change is making them all that bit worse.
OK, so hot this weekend. Let's see what October does as far as the numbers are concerned. Victoria Finay, thanks very much indeed. I want to talk about the cost of living crisis. It's never far away, is it? Parents struggling with the rising cost of living, facing a shortage of baby milk in Britain's baby banks. In just a moment or two, we're going to be talking to Tom Parmenter about his piece. Many people have gone to these baby banks because they literally either can't afford it or can't get hold of baby formula. Here's his report.
I'm thinking we might be quite busy this week.
If you can, leave your prams and pushchairs upstairs, it makes it quicker. Welcome to Grow Baby.
We pray for the formula for the wipes.
At this church in Swindon, they pray for formula milk because they know there isn't enough for everyone in the queue. The fairest thing to do now is to ration it.
When that table behind you empties out, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking, great, what will I say to the next family that comes in desperately in need of formula? And I have to say, I'm so sorry, we've just run out. What happens to them then?
And that's every week, that conversation.
That's every week, yeah.
It's like she's 4 months, nearly 5 months now.
Ivy's mum, Kayla, can't quite believe she's at the church baby bank. She's on maternity leave from her job. Her partner works, but they still struggle to keep up with the cost of formula.
It's literally a milk crisis. It makes me feel so angry and irritated that parents are forced to feel ashamed that they can't afford milk for their babies and that the government aren't listening. They're not doing anything.
What would you say to someone who is in a position to make a difference with this?
Help. Please help. Don't sit there and judge and look and ponder, just do it. It's as simple as that.
In Scotland, they are examining whether struggling families can be given cash to help out. But in the rest of the UK, there's little change.
We do cover Newcastle, but by far our biggest areas are Gateshead and Sunderland and South Tyneside.
In the northeast of England, we were invited to join the first meeting of a new movement, the Baby Bank Alliance.
These people aren't a number. These are families, these are children.
Their aim is to bring together 300 baby banks across the nation who are facing unprecedented demand.
It feels quite fragile, the whole safety net that you all provide.
Yeah, it is. By working with the Alliance, and one of the things I'm hoping to get from this is taking it further, taking it to the policy makers, the decision makers, because when the prevention happens, you'll see a change in the community in terms of the response that's needed.
The Westminster government insists they are providing significant support to families. But the UK's baby banks and the parents they're trying to help would disagree.
Tom with us now. And Tom, I was hearing from somebody who runs a baby bank in the last hour, and they were telling me they can't actually take baby formula as a gift from those that make it because it's against the law.
No, the rules around first baby formula milk are quite strict because there is a desire to promote breastfeeding, which of course is the best solution. But the reality is it's not the only solution that families can use, because so many families, for all sorts of different reasons, rely on formula milk, and they just simply, in so many cases now, cannot afford the prices in the shops. We told you earlier in the year about the desperate measures that many families are having to take. And the situation, as you saw in that report from Swindon, we're in Buxton in Derbyshire this morning, another baby bank having to ration because of the demand that they are seeing from people, families, quite often working families, who need that help to get the baby formula that they need to feed their babies. And the prices in the shops remain the same. The value of Healthy Start vouchers remains the same. And we heard, didn't we, this week at the party conference up in Manchester, the Conservatives splashing a lot of money around for transport initiatives across the north, which of course are needed. But you also have this unbearable situation for so many families of having to queue up at baby banks, not knowing whether or not that bank can provide them with the formula that they need to feed their children. We were warned earlier in the year that this is leading to the brink of a public health crisis for infants, because that first year is so crucial, and so many infants up and down this country are not getting the nutrition they need, or their parents are having to forage elsewhere for the formula milk to feed their babies.
OK, thanks, Tom. Looking at today's other headlines on the programme for you now, and a court's heard how an 18-month-old boy had 70 visible injuries when he died in a caravan in Herne Hill in Kent in November of 2020. There's little Alfie. His mother and her former partner are on trial for murder, which they deny. Teenage girl's in a coma after she was physically attacked by Iranian authorities for not wearing a hijab. Human rights organisation Hengor says 16-year-old Amita Geravan suffered severe injuries at the hands of the so-called morality police. In northeast India, at least 14 people have been killed and a further 102 are missing after flash floods. The water swamped several towns, washed away a bridge and submerged army camps. Sky News understands that Metro Bank is drawing up plans to raise hundreds of millions of pounds of new capital in a bid to strengthen its troubled balance sheet. It's understood the company has drafted in bankers at Morgan Stanley to help raise funds. Metro Bank has 2.7 million customers' accounts, making it one of the 10 largest banks in Britain. Savings and mortgages are not at risk. Eurostar staff are on alert due to a bedbug infestation in Paris. The invasive insects have been spotted in homes, cinemas, hospitals and on the metro, although one government minister has insisted there's no outbreak on Paris's public transport network. Social media would potentially suggest otherwise. Don't forget, of course, that Paris is hosting the next Olympics. Victoria Beckham has opened up about her life in a new interview with NBC. She talked about her early relationship with David, breaking into the fashion industry and being bullied at school.
I've never been the best at anything. I've just worked really, really hard. I remember being at dancing college, phoning my mum, crying, I want to come home. My dad then got on the phone and said, absolutely not. You stay there, you work hard. I was bullied a lot. I often talk to Harper about that. I say, you know, if there's a little girl on her own in the playground, that little girl was mummy, and that hurts.
Also, there's a Netflix documentary as well as at the moment. Andrew Flintoff, Ivor, is here. We've seen him speaking really publicly for the first time since that terrible accident.
Yeah, that's right. A video has been put out by the England and Wales Cricket Board that was filmed last month, actually, and it's the first time he refers to this accident, this very bad car crash he had whilst filming for Top Gear. It happened last December. He's kept a very low profile since then, and this video really explains why. I think we can have a watch of it. Have a listen now.
This changes your life. It's one of them things is before and after it. This enables you to walk taller, move faster, play with passion, play with pride, play with belief, and also part of a family of people that will still share the good times with you, the successes. But as I found over the past few months, we learn the hardest times of your life that will stand next to you.
Now, he was at an award ceremony for young cricketers, but he was talking about his cricketing family.
Yeah, exactly. It was awarding the first cap to this newest England player, Tom Hartley. He's talking about the England family, how this will change your life, being part of the England setup, and then referring there later on the second half of that clip about the support he got from the England cricket family during the good times, but also the bad times, which he specifically mentions these last few months, the hardest of his life. So he was the former cricket captain of the England setup, a real talisman of the team. Then he became this TV presenter, successful one, presenting Top Gear, and then had this crash in December. We didn't get many details about it, but then we got an image of him back in September where he appeared with still sporting some facial injuries 9 months on. So that tells you just how bad the injuries were. Several broken ribs too. Now we know that he seems to be fighting fit again, but clearly it's been a difficult time.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. We've been chatting to the Transport Secretary this morning, representing the government, and specifically wanted to talk to him about the scrapping of the northern leg of HS2, the northwestern leg, the northeastern leg, scrapped some time ago. He said it was for the best. North of Tyne Mayor Jamie Driscoll is with us now. Hi, Jamie. For the best. What do you think?
OK. I would have preferred HS2 fully delivered all the way up to the northeast. Northern Powerhouse Rail fully delivered. But as you say, they cancelled that 2 years ago. And it's once you're in between a rock and a hard place, there really is no good decision. But if you were to ask the people of Newcastle, the people of Sunderland, would you rather have more metro lines, a better bus service, or potentially be able to travel 140 miles to Manchester and then get on a train to London? Well, obviously, they're going to choose the investment in the northeast. I think the reason people are so frustrated about this is, how did we even get to this situation in the first place, escalating costs? The whole system of HS2 only really works if you deliver all of it. And the situation we're in now, it's not a good situation. But for people like me who are representing specific parts of the country where we've had very little transport investment, I've been speaking to the Secretary of State for Transport over spoke to him yesterday, spoke to him recently, saying, look, if you are going to cancel this, if this is on the cards, which we know it was, make sure that you don't take the money back to Treasury. Make sure you invest it in places like this. I want to build a total transport network where the buses and the metro and the train system integrate, where we can have free fares for under 18s. So we boost public transport for the long term. And we are getting more money for that. So let's call it a silver lining in the cloud, shall we?
OK. I suppose one of the questions, actually a question that I put to the Transport Secretary, and that was, well, what if these projects also overrun? What happens then?
Well, that's the issue, isn't it? I mean, can government get good value for money? And that's where the devolution really comes into it. So if you look at, we've had a project called Metro Flow, which has been increasing the capacity on the Tyne and Weir metro system. On time, on budget, we did it. So it is possible to do these things. And I think that's where, when the sort of command and control from Whitehall, where there's too many voices asking for changes all the way through, I think you're setting yourself up to fail. So part of what was announced yesterday was, at the moment, our new devolution deal comes into effect in May. We get £600 million of capital. We're getting an extra 1.8 billion in the next phase, partly as a result of yesterday's announcement. That means we get to decide how it works. So we can talk to the businesses, to the schools. We can come up with a transport plan that works for us, and then we are responsible for it. I think that's the way that these decisions get made, in a way that they get delivered and deliver value for money.
OK, £36 billion. How far will it go? I mean, the Elizabeth line here in London cost half of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's ways of doing things in a very expensive way. There's ways of doing things in a cheaper way. So it was obviously HS2. Had it been 36 billion, that probably would have delivered it. It was going to be extra tens of billions on top of that. The fact that no one can give us a reliable figure for what it would have actually cost, I think says a lot about the management of government. Rishi Sunak has been Chancellor, Prime Minister, Chief Secretary, Treasury. You know, he, of anyone, should have been on top of the costs of this. So there are questions to answer about that. So this is where you've got to also make sure your investment is getting more people onto the public transport network so it pays for itself in time. And this is where integration really matters. Big systems that don't integrate with the buses, with the existing light rail systems like the Metro in the Tyne and Weir area, well, if you're building things piecemeal rather than in a coordinated way with a proper total transport network in a region, then you're not going to get the same kind of value for money. So this is where devolution really pays the dividends.
OK, I also put to the Transport Secretary that in all reality, the government knew that they were going to scrap HS2. And they kept saying, we haven't decided, we haven't decided, we haven't decided. But the Prime Minister, as we know, recorded before he left London on the Sunday, or perhaps even on the Saturday, that it was to be scrapped. How should we process that information?
To my mind, it was cancelled 2 years ago. The entire business case depended on delivering the whole thing. They cancelled the northern leg. It wasn't going to Leeds, it wasn't going to York, it wasn't coming anywhere near Newcastle in the northeast. In July, the Infrastructure and Projects Authority gave it a rating saying it was red and undeliverable. So all this will we, won't we? Yeah, I think that was political messaging. To my mind, they'd already made the decision. You know, it's a bit like, I don't know, you're going to get up for work in the morning. Yes, you only make the decision when you finally get out of bed, but you know you've got to do it. So it has been cancelled for ages, and they finally just got around to saying, perhaps they made the decision about what they were going to do with the money. And I, like I'm sure many of the people, were lobbying the Transport Secretary, saying, if that's going to happen, make sure you spend the money on our projects. Perhaps that was what they were doing at the last minute.
Just seeing your rainbow flag there, I'm guessing it's a rainbow flag rather than one for Cusco. What did you make of what the Prime Minister had to say yesterday about a man being a man and a woman being a woman? That's all there was to it.
Yeah, you know, we've had these very divisive culture wars issues for a long time. My opinion is let people live their lives the way they want to live their lives. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the days when you would perhaps see two men walking down the street holding hands and people regarded that as offensive. And we've made huge strides in dealing with homophobia. Let's not go backwards. Let people live their lives the way they want to live their lives. They're not bothering anybody else, and just have respect for people.
Hear, hear. Good to talk to you, Jamie. Always a pleasure. Thank you. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Weekend looks unseasonably warm, but the next couple of days will be cooler with rain in the north and the west. Mostly mild now, although chilly in the northeast, but rain over northern Ireland and islands spreading into northwestern Britain. That rain will spread to all but South Wales and central, southern and eastern England this morning, while the northwestern half of Ireland will dry up.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
King Charles's image is to be engraved on Australian coins this year. It'll appear on 10 million $1 coins, and they'll be in circulation before Christmas, which is nice. Still to come, the demands for action on the baby formula shortage as some baby banks start rationing how much they're handing out to families. We talked to one of the last British home children survivors in Canada.
They've pushed the protesters further back here. There's around 200 or 300 still remaining.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
This van goes onto the streets of Plymouth 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
These facilities at the moment are a lifesaver. It's all we've got.
From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region, hearing from people who have real stories.
I'm going
and have nowhere to live for about 3 or 4 months.
There are still people inside the properties here. They are coming from the epicentre of what is now a global health pandemic. We were seeing and speaking to young women who were selling themselves right on the high street. It was desperately sad, and the fact it was happening right in the heart of this community.
Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight.
What's your feeling about the future then?
Blake might all be finished, I don't know.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Again, everybody, you are watching the breakfast programme here on Sky News Thursday morning, talking about baby formula in just a moment. But first, let's tell you what the Transport Secretary told this programme earlier on today. He says he's proud of the decision to scrap the Manchester leg of HS2, saying it was in the interests of the country. Just Stop Oil protesters have halted a West End performance of Les Mis after invading the stage during one of the show's iconic numbers. And Sky News has spoken to families struggling to get a hold of baby milk, either because it's too expensive or baby banks are running short of supplies. Let's get more on that story now. Should we joining us is Alison Thewliss, SNP MP for Glasgow Central. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. What can you do in Scotland for those that are struggling as far as getting baby formula for whatever reason?
So the Scottish Government has already looked at some of the issues around supply of infant formula. We've had a short life working group in the Scottish Government working with stakeholders right across Scotland to look at some of these issues and to see what more can be done to support families in this cost of living crisis. And a lot of this is about making sure that there's a cash-first approach. So in Scotland, we have the pioneering Scottish Child's Payment, £25 per child per week, and that's helping quite a lot to make sure that families are able to afford things like infant formula where they require it. We've also got the Best Start grants, which are like the Healthy Start grant in England, but slightly more generous in terms of giving families access to financial support for foods. And what I've seen through the all-party group on infant feeding and inequalities that I chair is a whole series of ways in which families are struggling to afford infant formula. And in England, that should be an upgrading of the money available through the Healthy Start grant in England, because many families can't access it and it's not enough to afford a tin of infant formula. So instead, families are then relying on baby banks, on food banks, and that's putting huge pressure on those resources as well. And it shouldn't be in this day and age that families are having to turn to those food banks and baby banks in order to feed their babies, but that's the sad reality that we are in this cost of living crisis at the moment. And I would like to see the UK government do an awful lot more to put more money in families' pockets so that they're not resorting to going to food and baby banks. And as some of your previous reports have indicated, getting formula from social media sites or indeed stealing it from shops.
And Alison, what about suggestions that baby formula companies are just charging too much?
Yes, and the evidence that we've had at the EPPG on infant feeding and inequalities is that the cost of infant formula in recent years has soared, and there's really no justification for the increase in costs there. It's disproportionate. And a lot of that, as the recent series in The Lancet has found, is to do with marketing of infant formula. All the money that you see, all the adverts that you see in the shops or adverts that you see in magazines or on the media, all of that's adding to the cost that families are paying for a tin of infant formula. And I'd like to see the UK government get a bit more involved in this and regulating this side of the market so that families aren't paying a premium, which is mainly just marketing.
OK, good to talk to you. Thank you. Other news, tens of thousands of asylum seekers could be at risk of homelessness as the government works to clear the application backlog before the end of the year. That's the warning from the British Red Cross, whose policy and advocacy manager, Alice Lucas, has been looking into that for us, and she's with us now. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. So, homelessness for asylum seekers, where are we?
Well, so according to our latest projections, we're set to see up to 50,000 people at risk of homelessness before the end of the year if the government meets its commitment to clear the backlog but doesn't offer urgent support. What we're seeing at the moment is that people are being given as little as 7 days to move on and find new housing. Simply not enough time. We're seeing through our services that people are really struggling. In Leicester, we're handing out between 3 to 5 sleeping bags a day because people are worried about sleeping rough.
OK, so is there no housing available? Is that what you're saying?
So because we're clearing the backlog at a rate of, at the rate that we are, which is a welcome, and we welcome the government doing that. We've long been calling for the backlog to be cleared. People are being told that they're given a really small amount of time to move into new accommodation. They're only given 28 days, and there's been a change in the way that the Home Office is doing that, so they only get 7 days at the moment. 7 days to find a new house. What that's doing is putting pressure on local authorities. They're just not able to find people their homes in that time. What they normally give is 56 days, so the local authority has 56 days to find people a home who are at risk of homelessness. Refugees are only being given 7.
OK, so hotels?
So there are people who are currently in hotels, and we support, the people being moved out of hotels, but making people destitute is not the solution there. So making people destitute, they've been waiting for a number of years for their asylum claim. Some people have been waiting for up to 3 years. They get their status. What should be a cause of celebration is now causing great distress. As I said, in some of our services, we're also seeing people who've got HIV, who are sleeping rough, struggling to take their medication. What we're asking for is the government to give these people support, coordinate that with local authorities, and most importantly, extend that move-on period to 56 days. So it's in line with what the local authorities are already doing to support people at risk of homelessness.
OK. I mean, the government would say in response, come on, we're damned if we do, damned if we don't. We're trying to do our best here.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we've been calling on for the extension of the move-on period for a long time at the British Red Cross. Actually, we did our own research and we found that extending the move-on period will actually reduce costs to the taxpayer. It's better for local communities, better for the government, and it's better for refugees. They just want to be able to restart their lives, get on, contribute to society.
But the Home Office and local authorities are at loggerheads, aren't they? Because the local authorities have to deal with homelessness, and the Home Office is saying we need that accommodation for those that are coming across, and now, for whatever reason, they've left their homeland, they're coming across on small boats or whatever, they need somewhere to live as well.
So what we're talking about here today is people who've already gone through the asylum system and have their claim processed. So these are people.
So which category do they fall into?
They've been people who have been granted their refugee
status. So there's a third category.
Their claim assessed, and these are people who they're being given 7 days to move on. That's causing a huge strain on local authorities. And what we're saying is, at the British Red Cross, is there just needs to be a greater coordination with the government. And again, really simple policy change, extending that time 56 days, just giving people a little bit more time to find somewhere to live. So 56 days at the moment.
Instead of 7?
Instead of 7, 56 days, it just gives people time. They want to, you know, every time that we've met anyone through our services, they say they just want to restart their lives. They've spent a really long time waiting in limbo. They want to get on, they want to contribute, and they want to find employment.
Okay.
This is just giving them a chance.
Alice, it's good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for explaining that to us. Thank you. Let's look at other news now. Front of many of the papers, actually, football fans facing the prospect of travelling thousands of miles to catch World Cup matches in 2030 after it was announced the tournament would be held across 3 continents. How's that going to work? Rob's here. Don't get it.
6 countries and 3 continents as well, so it's going to start...
That's a lot of air miles, isn't it?
It is, and how does that help FIFA achieve their supposed target of net zero by 2040?
Yeah.
It's so much travel for the fans as well, big cost. You could have, say, England, if they qualify, going all the way to Argentina, Paraguay or Uruguay for one game, then flicking back to Europe to complete the rest of it, or North Africa.
Why are they doing this?
Well, is it ultimately about money and all those political
Surely
dealings?
not.
And ultimately, perhaps, it's about the 2034 World Cup. And FIFA seem to be in discussions about getting it to Saudi Arabia. Immediately after this announcement, which we weren't expecting yesterday, Saudi Arabia launched their own bid for the World Cup in 2034, which will raise all sorts of human rights questions, while the wider plans raise these environmental questions and just generally questions about, you know, sustainability and about the whole plan. But I suppose FIFA would say, by spreading it out, it means you're not having to build unnecessary stadiums in one country.
OK, so it's South America, North Africa, and there's another continent?
Spain and Portugal as well. So,
Europe as well?
Yeah.
OK. So fans who are watching this morning who want to perhaps follow the fate of England as they finally lift the World Cup for the first time since 1966, come on, let's think positive, and they'll have to do a lot of air miles.
They will, and particularly just going to South America for one game potentially and then having to come back rather than the usual at least 3 group stage games that you get. And also the temperature will be pretty different as well. Think about Uruguay in June will be winter, so it'll be around 15 degrees. You come to the European or North African side, it could be 30 degrees. So
where's the final going to be?
We don't know yet, but
you
sure?
Maybe a different continent.
Well, who put it past them to put it then in somewhere
And just the Saudi angle, tell me more about that.
Well, they've been pumping so much cash into football. We've seen the hundreds of millions they've been spending. And for them, this is all about their own post-oil future. They want power, they want status, they want to use sport as the way in enhancing the country generally, and to perhaps be talking less about human rights. Obviously, we saw Newcastle, owned by Saudi Arabia, winning in the Champions League last night, showing their impact. But sport is a big state aim. They're effectively taking over golf, and the World Cup's the one they want.
OK, let's see what happens. 2034. For now, thanks very much. Thanks, Rob. Other news, Prime Minister has announced plans to create what he calls a smoke-free generation. The legal age to buy cigarettes will soon increase by a year, every year, meaning it would eventually become illegal to buy them. It's a policy that was introduced in New Zealand last year. Let's hear more from Laura.
It's difficult to say. The law's only been in place since January of this year, and the most crucial part of it, which is banning anyone born after 2009 from buying cigarettes, doesn't come into effect until 2027. It essentially means that anyone who is now 14 will never be able to buy a cigarette in their lifetime, which is kind of incredible if you think about it. But it is safe to say that we rarely really see people smoking anymore, and smoking rates have been dropping in New Zealand since the 1980s. Around 8% of people now smoke daily, and that's expected to drop even further to around 5%. Now, that's only in part because of this latest policy. It's also because of other things like increasing excise tax on cigarettes, which has made it incredibly expensive. But in place of smoking, I'm sure it's the same in the UK, we have another problem here, and that is vaping. The number of people vaping in this country, young people vaping, I should say, is increasing. And that's something that experts say politicians have failed to get on top of fast enough.
So there. Meantime, Rishi Sunak says it's just common sense that a man is a man and a woman is a woman. We'll get reaction to that statement. Said it in his speech yesterday, didn't he?
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
There's a feeling amongst some commentators that it's not the most respectful timing.
I think there's a word for it, fake news.
I mean, it's wow, wow, wow from Harriet. Delving deeper into the stories with different perspectives on tomorrow's headlines.
We really haven't seen the government getting round the table and negotiating. There are no easy answers to those questions.
The press preview delivering you tomorrow's news tonight on Sky News.
Hello again, everybody. You're watching The Breakfast Show here on Sky News Thursday morning. A very good morning, or good evening if you're watching us from Canada. Today, late 19th, early 20th century Britain sent almost 100,000 children to Canada. We know they were given the promise of a better life, but instead many suffered hardship and abuse. One of the last survivors has just celebrated his 100th birthday. Here's James with more.
There'll be bluebirds over.
On his 100th birthday, they sang Georgie's favourite song.
Just you wait and see. There'll be love and laughter.
George Beardshaw is one of Canada's last surviving British home children. Youngsters from orphan institutions who were shipped from the UK as cheap labour. Their story casts a shadow to this day.
I know a lot of people thought we were the scum of the earth. Britain was sending over some of the scum, from up the streets of London,
This was George when he sailed to Canada in 1938. He was among more than 100,000 British home children sent to work typically on farms and as domestic servants. They were routinely overworked and many were abused.
Some pitchforks through them. Some slept in the barn with the cattle. I know all that stuff right there.
In the corner of a Toronto cemetery stands a memorial to British home children whose remains were found in unmarked graves. Laurie Olszewski is founder of the charity Home Children Canada.
They knew
what was going on with the kids. They knew about the horrific treatment.
She wants the country to apologise for its treatment of British child migrants, following the example of the UK and Australia.
You know, it's recognition that what was done to these children was wrong.
Charles and Camilla.
George Beardshaw has received birthday wishes from a British king and queen.
Mr. Trudeau.
And Justin Trudeau, Canadian Prime Minister. Some of the home children would say that Justin Trudeau should be making an apology to the home children. What do you think?
Oh, yes, maybe, yes, yeah. Oh, I think so, yeah.
Canada's Parliament has passed a motion of apology, but none has been forthcoming from the government itself. In a statement to Sky News, it said it regretted the children's suffering and abuse, but the statement contained no apology. Mr. Trudeau, does your government owe an apology to the British home children?
Great to see you, sir.
Does your government owe them an apology?
No.
Happy birthday to you.
If sorry is the hardest word, it comes with a hard reality. Those who've waited longest for it can't wait forever. James Matthews, Sky News, in London, Ontario.
And so say all of us. Now, Rishi Sunak said in his conference speech that it's just common sense that a man is a man and a woman is a woman. He got cheers from the audience of Conservative MPs and activists. This is what he said. Actually, let's listen to what Ellie said first.
People who openly say that they're prejudiced against trans people has increased really quite significantly, almost a majority of the population. And that's terrifying as someone who has to go out and live my life as a trans person. You know, this isn't a topic for debate at a conference for me. It's my everyday, day-to-day life. And when I see, the amount of abuse that myself and other people, my friends, are getting, whether that's online or unfortunately is increasing in person now, this sort of rhetoric from the most powerful man in the country only furthers that hatred.
Well, just a reminder of what he said.
And we shouldn't get bullied into believing that people can be any sex they want to be. They can't. A man is a man and a woman is a woman. That's just common sense.
I'm joined by the feminist writer Jean Hatchett. Hi, Jean. Good to see you. What did you make of what the Prime Minister had to say?
Hello, good morning. Well, women have fought for more than a decade for Rishi Sunak to be able to stand and say what we all know is basic common sense, and we've been unable to get parties to listen to us now for a very long time. So it's good that some politicians are able to now see that women's rights are very important, and that being able to speak about our bodies and the reality of living life as a female person. It's good to hear them, but sadly we haven't got the Labour politicians still aren't listening to what women are saying about our need for safety and our need for protected rights within specific policy areas like the NHS. And I think, I almost lost my job for saying that I believe in sex-based rights, and I know women have been arrested, and thanks to my Forstater in Forstater v CGD, it is now a protected right to say that you believe that people cannot change sex. So I think that the Conservatives are with us on this one issue. My fear as a feminist woman is that they will let us down as women on many other issues. So this for me is not the single issue that it is for some. And I want to see them tackling male violence. I'm quite worried about what's been said about charities, because clearly for me, I think women working in sectors that protect women from male violence need to be certain that the funding will be there. So when I hear that Stonewall is being targeted, yes, Stonewall has embodied some dangerous policies for women, I feel. But if they're talking about attacking all charities, some of those that protect women, then, can we trust them on that?
Why do you think the Prime Minister felt the need to talk about this yesterday? Is it an issue that will define the next election as far as you're concerned?
I think it will, and I think Labour are being very naive if they think it will not. I think the Tories are being quite opportunist, if I'm honest, because they were the ones that first introduced the notion of self-ID as allowing people to self-ID into whatever gender they liked. They introduced it. Yes, they swept it away, but they did that because women fought. And I think now they're coming to women with, they want to grasp what we're saying with both hands, because they've been a bit smarter than Labour. They've realised that women are waking up the public. Women are saying these things. People are listening. We are talking about our rights, our need for safety and protection, our rights under the Equality Act. And we need all the politicians to listen, because this is women cross parties are saying this. And it's really, really important to listen to what we're saying, because that is going to be a vote winner. It really is.
OK, good to talk to you. Thanks for taking the time live from Sheffield this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's going to get warm again by the weekend. 29 degrees is what we're being told. What about right now?
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Weekend looks unseasonably warm, but the next couple of days cooler, with rain in the north and the west, mostly mild now, although chilly in the northeast. But rain over Ireland and Northern Ireland is spreading into northwestern Britain. That rain will spread to all but South Wales and central, southern and eastern England this morning, while the northwestern half of Ireland will dry up. Temperatures will be like yesterday's, but with a strengthening wind.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up in the next hour, the Transport Secretary says that he is proud of Rishi Sunak's decision to cancel HS2, and people will see the benefits in increased funding for other projects like buses in the north of the country. Here's a question. When do you think the Prime Minister knew that he was going to scrap HS2? Was it just when he made his hours before he made his speech yesterday, or did he know before he even went to Manchester and decided not to announce it until the last minute because of where HS2 North West Lake was going to go? Don't know. We're going to be talking about that in more detail here on the programme. One other story that we want to bring to you as well is about baby formula, the cost of that and what hard-pressed families are doing about it. All of that to come in just a moment. Stay tuned. Good morning, everybody. It is 9 o'clock. You're very welcome to join us for the final hour of the breakfast show here on Sky News. Thursday morning, the Transport Secretary telling this programme he's proud of cancelling the Manchester leg of HS2 and people will see the benefits soon as the money is reinvested. Thursday, 5th of October. David Cameron, George Osborne both think it's a ludicrous decision.
Yes, and they're absolutely entitled to their opinion. I worked closely with both of them in government and was very proud to serve with them, but that was a number of years ago.
Mark Harper insists that new northern transport projects will be managed carefully. Storming the stage, Just Stop Oil shot down a performance of Les Miserables in London's West End. Queuing for baby milk, the families struggling to feed their children and resorting to desperate measures.
I've never been the best at anything. I've just worked really, really hard.
Victoria Beckham opens up about her early relationship with David, breaking into the fashion industry and being bullied at school. And Freddie Flintoff speaks publicly for the first time since his crash on Top Gear, telling England's cricketers they're part of a family.
They'll share the good times with you, the successes. But as I found over the past few months, we learn the hardest times of your life that will stand next to you.
Morning, everyone. The Transport Secretary says he's proud of the decision to scrap the Manchester leg of HS2, saying it was in the interest of the country. I asked Mark Harper about criticism from the likes of the former Prime Minister David Cameron about the decision to scrap the remaining project. He said the facts have changed, so a different decision was needed. Here's what he had to say.
We've been working on this decision it's a big decision. We've been obviously putting a huge amount of work into it. I took the formal final decision on Tuesday and it was agreed by the Cabinet at its meeting on Wednesday morning and then announced properly by the Prime Minister to the country in his conference speech.
Why did he record a video saying it was scrapped when it hadn't been?
Well, we did lots of work in advance. We published a document yesterday. We laid a command paper in Parliament setting all the details out. That's obviously been being worked on. These are big decisions. We put a lot of work into them. That work was obviously done in advance, but the decision was taken this week on Tuesday by me and agreed by the Cabinet and set out by the Prime Minister in his speech. All very straightforward.
Why did he say it had been scrapped when it hadn't then? Because you said the decision was only made on Tuesday. This was filmed at least before last Sunday.
Well, Kay, we published a document yesterday, laid a command paper before Parliament, which had been worked on, and clearly that had been worked on in advance. You do work in advance, and then you take a formal decision, which I did on Tuesday, and the Cabinet agreed on Wednesday, and then we set it out. Now, look, we can keep going around this circle if you want. I've been very clear about what happened and the details, and I'm very happy to answer the substantive questions about the decision we made for your viewers.
Minister, with due respect, I do the questions. If you don't mind, I'll decide what I'm asking you during this 8 minutes that we have with you. David Cameron, George Osborne both think it's a ludicrous decision.
Yes, and they're absolutely entitled to their opinion. I worked closely with both of them in government and was very proud to serve with them, but that was a number of years ago. The facts have changed. The costs of the project have escalated. The patterns of travel have changed post-pandemic, so facts have changed. So this government's taken a different decision. The Prime Minister's taken a different decision that he thinks and I think is in the interests of the country.
Mari is here. She's been with me all week. Well, he was edgy, wasn't he?
He was edgy, and he was edgy because there's questions around how much transparency, how much honesty the government is giving us about that HS2 announcement. You asked them over and over again all week whether a decision had been made, including the Chancellor. And they all said no decision had been made when we know that that video was filmed before party conference in Downing Street. So there are questions now about whether that was a lie. There are questions about whether, I've asked Downing Street whether there was another version filmed where the pro-HS2 version was filmed and they decided which one to film. They said they didn't know, they weren't aware. So there are still questions about whether they are really being honest with us and therefore the public. And interestingly, let's not forget, October 2022, so just almost a year ago, 25th of October, Rishi Sunak stood on the steps of Downing Street and he said, "Trust is earned and I will earn yours." Now, I know it might seem like a small thing, but actually
Not
being
for people in
honest and
Manchester, it
transparent,
doesn't.
exactly, and being honest and transparent really matters. And that is what Rishi Sunak promised, and that is what he said he was going to essentially root out and try and start afresh. So he already rebranded himself as a change candidate when he came to office by saying he was going to restore integrity, honesty, professionalism. And now he's saying he's going to be a change candidate again. And if he's not going to be transparent on this, then people might start asking themselves what else he might not be transparent about. And that's why it matters.
What did you make of the speech?
The speech was interesting. The use of his wife to kind of have an emotive connection, I think it's actually interesting because I think Rishi Sunak...
Not the first time it's been done, of course.
It's not the first time it's been done. The last time it was done was Gordon Brown's wife, Sarah Brown, 2009, and he went on to lose that election. But what is interesting is I think there's an effort to try and, what they keep talking about, is show the real Rishi, humanise Rishi Sunak and trying to get the public to understand and get him and actually get to know him. Now, the issue is, the problem with his wife is the most kind of associated thing she is with when it comes to politics is the tax affairs and her non-dom status. And so people associate her with that. So the question is, was it wise to bring her on stage when that is what some people will associate her with, or would it be better if he just introduced himself? Questions we don't know the answer to yet. But it was an interesting speech. There were gaps, health and social care, there wasn't a lot on that. Tech, AI, there wasn't a lot on that. Focus on education, but we know that Keir Starmer is also going to be focusing on education, so they're going to be fighting it out when it comes to education policy.
And I'm sure our legal team would want me to say that she pays all appropriate taxes here in the United Kingdom.
Now she does,
yeah. So there. OK, thanks very much. Thanks a lot. Protests yesterday by Just Stop Oil. Remember them? They stopped the show at Les Mis in London's West End last night. They stormed the stage during the song "Do You Hear the People Sing?" and were greeted with a hail of boos. When they tried to address the audience, the activists then locked themselves to the set, which led to the evacuation of the theatre. Here's Saba.
Les Miserables had a miserable ending. Just Stop Oil disrupting the famous West End production about revolution. 4 activists stormed the stage with their banners, moments before the interval, at the climax of One Day More. A song about hope in the face of adversity. But what came next was far from hopeful. The protesters went on to lock themselves to the set using bike locks. The show was inevitably stopped and the audience were evacuated from the Sondheim Theatre. Unlucky for fans, some paying hefty amounts to see the iconic show.
For me, it was a little bit disappointing because I was really waiting for this show. In the middle of the song about revolution, in the middle of the protest, we got an actual protest. I think it's brilliant.
The theatrics, however, came with a serious message. One of the protesters has said in a statement, Rishi Sunak's just approved Rosebank, a new oil project in the North Sea. It will lead to hundreds of thousands of deaths due to starvation as crops fail in the increasingly extreme weather conditions. It goes on to say, am I not like Jean Valjean, that's the play's protagonist, justified in breaking the law to oppose this criminal government and its murderous policies? So far, 5 people have been arrested. And while the theatre says it supports freedom of expression, it stresses not at the expense of their customers. Saba Chowdhury, Sky News.
Worried about the planet. Victoria, do they have a point?
Well, they're not the only ones worried about the planet. We had some data come out last night that has confirmed that September was the hottest month on record. That comes off the back of the hottest June, July, August, the hottest summer, all these records being broken. So it's not just Stop Oil scientists are also using words like gobsmacking, whopping, crazy, huge to describe all of these records that are being broken. So September, it was not just hot, but it was hot. It broke the record by a huge margin, by ½ a degree. That doesn't sound like much, but actually when you're thinking of a kind of a global average, it's huge. It's the biggest jump that we've ever seen.
Wow.
And there's a few different reasons for this. Primarily, it's climate change. You know, it's warmed the planet by about 1.2 degrees already. On top of that, you've got an extra kind of bump of about 0.2 degrees coming from this warm weather pattern, El Nino. And just to really get a sense of how startling it is that all these records are being broken, people can look at our online coverage and see some graphs that show kind of all the trends from previous years. And then September just sort of drops off and goes in a different direction, really diverges. And that's for lots of different things. It's temperature, it's sea ice cover in Antarctica, all sorts. So that's why it's not just Stop Oil who are worried, it's scientists too.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. And of course, it's the really hot weekend as well, I think. So let's see what the figures do by the end of October. Thanks very much, Victoria. Thank you. Meantime, cost of living crisis, let's talk about that. We often do. Parents struggling are facing a shortage of baby milk in Britain's baby food banks. Many have been forced to ration how much they give to families every month. 300 baby food banks have now formed an alliance to try to put pressure on the government and push for meaningful change. Here's Tom.
I'm thinking we might be quite busy this week.
If you can, leave your prams and pushchairs upstairs, it makes it quicker. Welcome to Grow Baby.
We pray for the formula for the wipes.
At this church in Swindon, they pray for formula milk because they know there isn't enough for everyone in the queue. The fairest thing to do now is to ration it.
When that table behind you empties out, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking, great, what will I say to the next family that comes in desperately in need of formula? And I have to say, I'm so sorry, we've just run out. What happens to them then?
And that's every week, that conversation.
That's every week, yeah.
It's like she's 4 months, nearly 5 months now.
Ivy's mum, Kayla, can't quite believe she's at the church baby bank. She's on maternity leave from her job. Her partner works, but they still struggle to keep up with the cost of formula.
It's literally a milk crisis. It makes me feel so angry and irritated that parents are forced to feel ashamed that they can't afford milk for their babies and that the government aren't listening. They're not doing anything.
What would you say to someone who is in a position to make a difference with this?
Help. Please help. Don't sit there and judge and look and ponder. Just do it. It's as simple as that.
In Scotland, they are examining whether struggling families can be given cash to help out. But in the rest of the UK, there's little change.
We do cover Newcastle, but by far our biggest areas are Gateshead and Sunderland and South Tyneside.
In the northeast of England, we were invited to join the first meeting of a new movement, the Baby Bank Alliance.
These people aren't a number. These are families, these are children.
Their aim is to bring together 300 baby banks across the nation who are facing unprecedented demand.
It feels quite fragile, the whole safety net that you all provide.
Yeah, it is. By working with the Alliance, and one of the things I'm hoping to get from this is taking it further, taking it to the policy makers, the decision makers, because when the prevention happens, you'll see a change in the community in terms of the response that's needed.
The Westminster government insists they are providing significant support to families. But the UK's baby banks and the parents they're trying to help would disagree.
Tom's with us. Tom, what can the government do? What do people want from the government?
Well, this is an example of yet another baby bank that is having to ration the formula that they can give to the growing numbers of families who will be outside the door this morning, as they are many weekday mornings. We're at the High Peak Baby Bank in Buxton in Derbyshire. They're having to expand their services. Kirsty Jackson is the lady who runs this place. And Kirsty, this is a growing issue that you're seeing. And we can see next to you here, this is your stock of baby formula that you know will be in big demand yet again today.
It will. We're finding that we've had to open 3 more branches just to cover the need of the areas local to us.
And those conversations that you have to have with families to say, we've not got what you need, how difficult is that?
It's very difficult, and we're really lucky that a lot of our volunteers are in a similar circumstance, so they can they feel the way that those people coming to us do. We meet everything with a lot of sympathy and dignity, and everything is always purely confidential, but there is always going to be that stigma of people feeling guilty not being able to feed their children.
OK, Kirsty, thanks for talking to us this morning. Good luck with your day ahead. And that is a picture that is replicated in so many baby banks across the country. They are demanding government action. But so far, while there are moves in Scotland to make efforts to look at solutions, the rest of the UK has seen very little change.
OK, thanks. Looking at some of today's other headlines for you on the programme now, a breakfast show here on Sky News. Forgive me. A court has heard how an 18-month-old boy had 70 visible injuries when he died in a caravan in Herne Hill in Kent in November of 2020. There he is. That's Alfie. His mum and her former partner are on trial for murder, which they deny. Teenage girl in a coma after she was physically attacked by Iranian authorities for not wearing a hijab. Human rights organisation Hengor says 16-year-old Amita Geravand suffered severe injuries at the hands of the so-called morality police. Eurostar staff on alert due to a bed bug infestation in Paris. The invasive insects have been spotted in homes, cinemas, hospitals and also on the metro. Although one government minister has insisted there's no outbreak on Paris's public transport network. Just a reminder, of course, that Paris is hosting the next Olympics. Sky News understands that Metro Bank is drawing up plans to raise hundreds of millions of pounds of new capital in a bid to strengthen its troubled balance sheet. It's understood the company has drafted in bankers Morgan Stanley to help raise funds. Metro Bank has 2.7 million customer accounts, making it one of the 10 largest banks in Britain. Just to point out that if you've got a mortgage with them, or if you've got a savings account with them, or a regular account, none of those are impacted by their present woes. Victoria Beckham has opened up about her life in a new interview with NBC. She talks about her early relationship with David Beckham, breaking into the fashion industry and being bullied at school.
I've never been the best at anything. I've just worked really, really hard. I remember being at dancing college, phoning my mum, crying, I want to come home. My dad then got on the phone and said, absolutely not. You stay there, you work hard. I was bullied a lot. I often talk to Harper about that. I say, you know, if there's a little girl on her own in the playground, that little girl was mummy, and that hurts.
Let's get more, should we, from Ivor, and what's happening as far as Andrew Flintoff, Freddie Flintoff, as many of us know him,
yeah,
is
Freddie Flintoff.
concerned. We've seen him gradually moving back into the public arena.
That's right. So he had this car crash in December, the end of last year, whilst filming for Top Gear, because he is, of course, now a TV presenter after he was England cricket captain. But since then, he's kept a low profile, and this video has emerged of him speaking publicly for the first time about his recovery, and it really kind of explains why he's kept such a low profile, because he refers to his recovery as the hardest time of his life. The last couple of months, he's been part of the England cricket coaching setup, and that's where the video was filmed when he was awarding a cap to the new England bowler Tom Hartley. And I think we should be able to have a quick watch of it.
This changes your life. It's one of them things is before and after it. This enables you to walk taller, move faster, play with passion, play with pride, play with belief, and also a part of a family of people. Still share the good times with you, the successes. But as I found over the past few months, we learn the hardest times of your life that will stand next to you.
He's referring, of course, to the dark place that he went to, and you were talking about the injuries that he had as well. But his cricketing brotherhood, standing shoulder to shoulder with him.
Yeah, he referred to those as the cricketing family that kind of was with him along the way of his recovery, supporting him, because we now know that he had some pretty bad facial injuries that we saw a picture of back in September. That was 9 months afterwards. Here it is, his first appearance. So 9 months on from the accident, his facial injuries still on show there. That's kind of tells you just how serious this was. He also cracked a few ribs, broke a load of ribs. He was airlifted to hospital. And now we know basically why he's kept to such a low profile. But good to see him fighting fit again, and hopefully he'll be back on our screens again soon.
Indeed so. For now, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Still to come, we'll be talking about the right diet for women of a certain age, how they can live healthy during the menopause. And the PM promising to create a smoke-free generation. What does that look like? Stay tuned.
They pushed the protesters further back here. There's around 200 or 300 still remain.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
This van goes onto the streets of Plymouth 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
These facilities at the moment are a lifesaver. It's all we've got.
From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region, hearing from people who have real stories.
I'm gonna have nowhere to live for about 3 or 4 months.
There are still people inside the properties here. They are coming from the epicentre of what is now a global health pandemic. We were seeing and speaking to young women who were selling themselves right on the high street. It was desperately sad, and the fact it was happening right in the heart of this community. Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight.
What's your feeling about the future then?
Blake might all be finished, I don't know.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Recognise this young man, don't you? Winston Marshall, former member of Mumford & Son, and he's got a view on what Rishi Sunak said yesterday. Let's remind you.
People take up cigarettes when they're young. 4 in 5 smokers have started by the time they're 20. Later, the vast majority try to quit. But many fail because they're addicted and they wish they had never taken up the habit in the first place. Now, if we could break that cycle, if we could stop the start, then we would be on our way to ending the biggest cause of preventable death and disease in our country.
Winston is here. He's the co-founder of 1573 Cigars. How do you feel about what the PM had to say? Good morning.
Well, it's obviously scandalous that a Conservative Prime Minister of all parties would be infringing on the the liberties of Englishmen. It is not true, as he said, that tobacco, he said there's no amount of tobacco that's safe. No, that's not true. If you had one cigar on your 18th birthday, which I think everyone should have that pleasure of having, it wouldn't be bad for their health. And a very important detail is that tobacco raises in taxes for Britain 10.6 billion a year. and it costs the NHS 2.3 billion. So one of the best arguments, or one of the main push arguments against tobacco, is that it's expensive for the welfare state. On the contrary, it's good for the welfare state. It's in the interest of the taxpayer to keep tobacco legal. I should also add, if it were to be made illegal, there would be a black market which would cost millions to police.
OK, it depends which figures you look at as to how much the use of smoking tobacco costs the National Health Service, doesn't it?
Well, possibly. You could argue it, but then you're coming into basic liberties. We've been smoking tobacco in Britain longer than the Tory party even existed. We'll be smoking, sniffing, rolling, drawing it long after it's ash in the wind. I think that it's a freedom that we should all have, and it's not the place of government to tell us what we can and can't do with our bodies.
Is regular use of tobacco harmful?
It depends.
On what?
So, for example, a cigar is 100% tobacco leaf. That isn't as harmful, and there's some papers that indicate that it's good for certain parts of health. However, cigarettes, consistently taken, are not good for you. So another example would be snuff, which Britain are world leaders in. That, which you put it up your nose, that isn't nearly as harmful as cigarettes. Cigarettes are only about 10% tobacco. The rest of it is cellulose, and it's added salt, purposely made to be more addictive. So cigarettes are not healthy. But having an occasional fag here and there, I don't think there's any evidence that that's bad for your health.
But regular use of tobacco in the form of cigarettes is harmful.
In cigarettes, yeah, but it's not the case for tobacco.
He's right to say that.
No, he said tobacco, but cigarettes, it's harmful. But the occasional cigarette isn't.
No, but we're talking about regular use, aren't we?
Sure, but isn't that the choice of ours to make what we choose? Why should the government be telling us what we can and can't do with our body?
I suppose they're saying that for all sorts of reasons, not least because they want people to be healthier. And also, those people that do smoke regularly then have to rely on the National Health Service, which means that the rest of us have to pay for their addiction.
Well, as I said earlier, it's my opinion that the evidence suggests it's actually in the interest of the NHS to keep people smoking so that we tax and raise more money.
OK, I hear what you're saying, but what we want to do is for people to be unhealthy, smoking cigarettes more in order to be able to raise more money.
No, it's not a desire for people to be unhealthy. It's their choice what they do with their body.
Well, if you're 14 or 15, I'm guessing. I mean, you're little, you're young. It's right for the government to say you shouldn't be smoking at that age, no?
I don't mind if they say there's a minimum age to buy tobacco. Sure, whether it's 16, 18, we could decide that. We're talking about, Rishi Sunak's talking about making it completely illegal. This has already happened in New Zealand, by the way, where they have...
speaking to somebody in New Zealand this morning about it, actually, yeah.
Really? They've got a new law where if you were born after January 2009, you will never be able to buy tobacco because they increase the age that you can purchase year on year, which is, in my opinion, totalitarian.
I suppose the other side of that argument would be that sometimes government has to protect people from themselves.
Well, then we should have total lockdown again, stop driving, stop crossing the street, because nothing is without some danger.
Yeah, but as far as smoking is concerned, my understanding from the figures are that it's if you smoke cigarettes regularly, you've got a 50% chance of contracting cancer.
I'm not going to contend.
So that's like a flip of a coin.
But I'm not encouraging Brits to smoke regularly. But I think tobacco is a wonderful pleasure. It's the Native Americans still smoked and exchanged tobacco as gifts. It's used in ceremonies. It's a holy ritual for them. We've lost some of that, and there's definitely a conversation to be had about enjoying it properly, but making it completely illegal, snubbing it out completely is completely extreme.
So do you regularly smoke cigarettes?
I don't smoke cigarettes at all. I only smoke cigars.
And why don't you smoke cigarettes?
Because I think they're revolting.
And why do you think they're revolting?
Because they're not that really. It's only 10% tobacco. They intentionally, it's added salt to give you spikes in the nicotine rush, which means that you then want, it's more addictive, so you want to hit more. Whereas a cigar, you sit back, you relax, it's a slow sedation. And, I mean, Churchill was having 8 to 10 cigars a day. He lived to 90 years old.
Yeah, I'm sure he did. I'm not sure that that was particularly because he was smoking, but who knows? But would you not?
No, I don't think it was because he was smoking
No,
the cigars.
I don't think it was either,
leads
but
to
there you
longer
go.
life. But
just to be clear, you
but
weren't
it
suggesting
doesn't
that.
mean it's a death sentence.
No, but we are talking about cigarettes particularly.
I tell you what's even worse: the vaping. Vaping is absolutely revolting. There's no pleasure in that at all. I'm not for banning that. That's not for the the government, to tell us what we can and can't do. But let's have a conversation about what's really going on, like what's actually a good. Let's change the dialogue, the conversation around smoking. Having a nice, you want to see stop your grandpa having a nice pipe after Sunday lunch. That's a great pleasure. You know, here's another thing. There's been ever since King James I, there's a 400-year history of elites in Britain trying to stop regular people smoking tobacco. But I think it won't win, it can't win. But let's change the conversation to what is the proper way to enjoy this great, fine tradition.
Okay. Interesting debate. I'm sure people have got some very strong views. The other side as well. Winston, let's see what they say on Twitter. I'm not allowed to say Twitter anymore. I'm allowed to say X. Formerly known as Twitter. Are you on Twitter? X.
I am at Mr. Wynne Marshall.
We'll find you. It's good to see you. Thank
you for having me.
For joining us. Thank you. Bear with me a second. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Weekend looks unseasonably warm, but the next couple of days will be cooler with rain in the north and also in the west. Mostly mild now, although chilly in the northeast, but rain over Ireland and Northern Ireland is spreading into northwestern Britain.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up, talking about HS2 dominating the Tory conference, but there was plenty more that the PM announced as well. Discussing that next. Analysing the Conservative Party conference in just a moment. First, let me tell you what the Transport Secretary told me this morning. He says he's proud of the decision to scrap the Manchester leg of HS2, saying it was in the interests of the country. And what about Just Stop Oil? Well, they have halted a West End performance of Les Mis after invading the stage during one of the show's iconic numbers. And we've been talking to families here at Sky News struggling to feed their children as a result of baby formula shortages, who are resorting to desperate measures. Meantime, let's talk with James and Alicia about what happened at party conference. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us, both of you. Highlights from the speech for you, first of all, talking about the PM, of course.
I think the main recurring theme was definitely that Sunak is pitching himself as the candidate for change. Obviously, there were various policies that he announced, but the recurring element there was definitely that he is the candidate that is going to bring something new to politics. Obviously, that raised a few eyebrows, given that he is already the Prime Minister. So poising yourself as a candidate for change from yourself is a bit of an interesting line to take. But he really was just critical of the past 30 years of what he said was a sterile and status quo politics, and he said that that is what Labour very much adopts. So I think the key takeaway from the speech was definitely that Sunak has responded to the public, who have made it clear that they do want something different in politics, and he said that he will be that man.
And what about his wife's speech as well, before introducing him, let's say? You know, I read a piece in The Guardian today talking about how she'd referred to him as pulling himself up by his bootstraps in order to marry a billionaire. We should all do it.
I think that was quite an interesting decision. I think that after last year, with all the comments about Akshata Murthy's wealth, about the stories around her tax status, Number 10 clearly see her as a political asset in all of this. This was the first spousal introduction for 15 years since Sarah Brown did the same one about Gordon Brown in 2008. So I think that this was an attempt to really humanise the Prime Minister, and it clearly shows that the Conservatives think that their leader is stronger as a brand than their own party, and that's why they're going to emphasise it and make next year's contest a presidential one, Rishi versus Keir Starmer.
Did it work?
It's up for debate. I'd probably say no. I think people already have a very clear idea of who they think the Prime Minister is, and they do often see him as quite a robotic man. So I think the kind of familial element may be a little bit too late for the Prime Minister to really pull that back.
Yeah. Should they instead embrace the fact that they are an incredibly wealthy couple, but that doesn't then exempt them from caring about those that don't have their sort of wealth?
Yeah, that's the real balancing act that they're trying to get. And I think actually from the other side, Labour have always been trying to criticise the Prime Minister, not for aspiration, but rather, as you say, for being out of touch and being unable to empathise. So it's a thin line on both of these issues, which is that how do you show your kind of pro-business, pro-enterprise, enabling people to get on in life, while also, as you say, not seem too out of touch and filthy rich?
Yeah. Let's unpack the speech a bit more, should we? Why did he wander into the gender issue?
That's a very good question. I think lots of people are asking that. They think that it is quite a dangerous thing to talk about during conference, because ultimately this speech at conference, although he said it was about making long-term decisions, it was an election strategy. It's him trying to garner more traction, garner more votes in the run-up to the election, which could be any time pretty much within the next year. So bringing in the gender argument was quite a controversial thing for him to do, although what it does do is it appeals to people towards the right of the party who have kind of taken a bit of a stand recently and who are kind of acting as the front runners of the Conservative Party, and it does appeal to them. So I think by Sunak bringing that in, he's showing that he's bolder than Labour, or trying to show that anyway, and he's saying, I'm willing to be controversial and I don't mind if it upsets people because it's going to appeal to a specific wing of politics.
But immediately we were down in the weeds with the Transport Secretary this morning. I quoted the Equalities Act to him, and he's then wanted to explain to me that gender and sex are different.
Well, I think it's one of the few issues on what the whole party is united, actually. And I think you saw this in last summer's leadership contest, where he was going around talking about our women. I don't think naturally a phrase that would come to the Prime Minister's lips, but it's something I think that on the transgender issue is something that all the Conservative parties seems pretty united on, and that's why I think they've embraced kind of Kemi Badenoch's efforts on this issue of the equalities agenda. So that's why I included it in the speech, and he got a big round of applause for it.
Yeah, indeed. So what about him being, let's say, economical with the actuality when it came to when the decision was made about HS2? He put out a video that was obviously recorded before they went up to Manchester, and they time and time again told me, I'm sure they told you, that no decision had been made, when it quite clearly had.
I think he framed this as it being emblematic of strong leadership. And unfortunately, he said this just after he'd slammed Keir Starmer for the exact same thing. He said, we can't trust Keir Starmer because he breaks his promises, and then he said that showed weakness of leadership. But then when Sunak proceeded to break the promise of HS2, he kind of was very proud of it and said that it showed that he had strength in leadership, that he was willing to change his mind. As you said, just 12 hours before, he even said to Beth Rigby, who obviously is your political editor, he said, no decision has been made. And that was just 12 hours before the decision was made. So it's not
And Cabinet had already met and signed it off.
Exactly. So it won't just
it makes me so cross.
Regardless of what you think of HS2, whether you want it or not, the handling of this has been the thing that is really going to impact people's view of the Conservatives and people's view of Sunak. It's actually maybe slightly less about HS2 itself. It's the way that Sunak lost complete control of the narrative of the story and then wasn't able to come forward and say, yeah, do you know what, you've got me, hands up, this is what's happening, until the very end of the conference.
Yeah, it was really rather interesting the way in which this narrative was allowed to play out over the 4 or 5 days of conference season. I think in Number 10's defence, the argument they're putting forward is things like, well, videos are often recorded and then not used for different decisions, but I do agree it's more about technicalities.
They didn't record too.
Yes.
We've asked whether they recorded too. They said they're not sure, in other words.
Yeah, I mean, look, this clearly was a decision that had been made. Maybe there was a technical sign-off to do with the kind of Transport Secretary or Cabinet, but clearly I think that it's something that they were willing to have. And really, I think part of what Alicia said earlier about the change candidate, willing to go against his predecessors, and that's why we've seen David Cameron, Boris Johnson today come out and criticise the HS2 decision. It's a fight he's willing to have and a battle he's willing to pick.
Next week, Labour.
As in, what can we expect?
Yes.
Well, I mean, we haven't actually had a clear stance from Labour about HS2 yet. We've seen Sharon Graham, she's the leader of Unite the Union, really urge Labour to seize the opportunity and really fully commit to HS2. We saw the Shadow Transport Secretary, Louise Hay, yesterday condemn Sunak's decision to cancel it. So that may give a bit of a hint about what we're going to see there. But I think that's something we can definitely expect to have more of a sure answer to. I think we can also expect to see Starmer mention Sunak's weaponisation of the green agenda, for example. Obviously, Sunak has said that he's kind of anti-ULEZ and things like that. ULEZ, which is the ultra-low emission zone in London.
Yeah.
And obviously the net zero rollback with electric vehicles. So I think we can see Labour using that to their advantage and saying that they are for the environment, for example.
Well, Rishi Sunak will have seen this as throwing down the gauntlet to Labour on things like the smoking ban, something that West Streeting was considering doing, raising the age at which you can buy cigarettes. I suspect Labour will go along with that. I also think there's the question about the changes announced on education and A-levels and T-levels and that cash announcement for more money for teachers over 5 years. And I expect Labour will take a little while to decide what their view is on that, but then probably go along with it, as we've seen on other issues.
OK, let's see. It's good to see you both. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now, anybody who comes on the show knows that I like the Studio Baltic, and that is because I'm going through the menopause, basically, and I never know when that hot flush is going to come. Talking about that after the break.
They've pushed the protesters further back here. There's around 200 or 300 still remaining.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
This van goes onto the streets of Plymouth 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
These facilities at the moment are a lifesaver. It's all we've got.
From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region, hearing from people who have real stories.
I'll have nowhere to live for about 3 or 4 months.
There are still people inside the properties here.
They're coming from the epicentre of what is now a global health pandemic. We were seeing and speaking to young women who were selling themselves right on the high street. It was desperately sad, and the fact it was happening right in the heart of this community. Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight.
What's your feeling about the future then?
Blake might all be finished, I don't know.
Fly Emirates, fly better. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Rob's here just talking to him about the Rugby World Cup, asking when it finishes. Is it still going on?
Yeah, we're not at the end of the pool stage yet, so a bit of time off for the nations at the moment.
OK. What about what's happening as far as football fans are concerned and the 2030 World Cup?
Yeah, we might be used to big announcements with a fanfare. This was a behind-the-scenes deal done yesterday on a conference call between the top FIFA executives, and they've decided to merge the two rival bids that were there for the Men's World Cup in 2030. So the South American bid from Uruguay, Paraguay and Argentina, they were all bidding to mark 100 years of the first World Cup in Uruguay in 1930.
Trivial Pursuit question, yep.
Yeah, won by Uruguay, beating
Yep.
Argentina.
Yeah.
And the rival bid was from two continents, with Morocco linking up with Spain and Portugal. So instead, they're going to combine, and what a logistical and environmental challenge that will be.
What happened to their green credentials?
Well, they're claiming to be net zero by 2040, yet the South American part of the World Cup will only see 3 games played there, so we can get teams going there, fans going there, just for a single game each before coming across to Europe and North Africa.
And where's the final going to be? Uruguay, given that it's 100 years?
No, they've only got games at the start. It's all going to be focused on, we'd expect probably Spain for the final of the World Cup. And why is it all being done? Maybe not all about 2030 and that World Cup, but about clearing the path for 2034 and Saudi Arabia, because what they also decided was, since those World Cups have been awarded to 3 continents and those 6 countries, the 2034 World Cup could only possibly be in Asia or Oceania, and immediately Saudi Arabia launched their own bid, but Australia I don't think are happy because they're also trying to get it.
While I've got you, talk to me about the England team, cricket team.
Yeah, another World Cup's just started, the Cricket World Cup. England playing New Zealand. Of course, they beat them in the 2019 final so electrifyingly, but the star of that day is not fit today. Ben Stokes is out with a hip injury. They are saying it's just a slight injury and he should be fit for the next match, but
carrying bags like that he's probably got a hip injury. Flipping out, what's in there?
Yeah, it should be protected because he has come out of retirement in the one-day format to come and return for England, but they are going well in Ahmedabad in India, in quite an empty stadium, but it is the world's second biggest sports stadium, 130 capacity, named after Modi, the Indian Prime Minister. And yeah, perhaps not the crowd out there for that one. Perhaps no surprise where the world's biggest sports stadium is claimed to be in North Korea.
There we go. It's good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Let me tell you about King Charles. Yep, it was the coronation back in May. Well, now they've engraved a coin in his honour in Australia. He's going to appear on 10 million $1 coins, and they'll be in circulation before Christmas. Let's talk about the menopause, should we? Joining us now is Nisha Aslam, GP and co-author of a report into menopause nutrition. Tell me more.
So, good morning.
Morning.
So our report shows that women are actually entering the perimenopause and menopause lacking information about which specific nutrients they need to take them through this pivotal life stage. So as a result, women are entering the menopause with deficits in key vitamins and minerals. And this can have health consequences in the short term because it can make certain symptoms of the menopause worse, but also in the long run, it can increase the risk of significant
So many questions for you, so many questions. So what sort of minerals are we talking about? What sort of food should we take? And what impact on which particular, in other words, the hot flush, will it go if I eat properly?
So the hot flushes are usually related to hormonal changes, and so there's not much you can do with regards to supplements. But, you know, symptoms like fatigue, low mood, brain fog, they're really common in menopause, and you can certainly use supplements to combat those symptoms. So, for example, vitamin D is really, really important when it comes to bone health. You need to increase your calcium levels. A common complaint that women have when they come to see me is that they are really fatigued. So you need your B vitamins to combat that.
B12?
B12 is amazing for your nervous system, for your mood, for energy levels. As we get older and we enter the menopause, inflammation levels go up in the body. So you need to increase your levels of omega-3 in the diet. Now, that usually comes from oily fish, but we don't like eating oily fish as a nation. So that's where you need your omega-3 supplements.
OK. What should we be eating?
We should be eating the rainbow, so it should be a plant-rich diet, so nuts, good fats, 5
What's a good fat?
So a good fat, olive oil, avocado, eggs. But we know from the government data that we're not eating enough of our 5 fruit and veg, we're not eating enough oily fish, and that's where you need those multivitamins, those multi-minerals and omega-3 supplements to plug those dietary gaps.
OK. And when women come to you struggling with the menopause, what sort of advice do you give them, apart from nutrients?
I say look after yourself, so try and manage your stress levels, stay hydrated, keep moving, have a balanced diet. And if you're struggling to have a balanced diet because you're busy, you have children, then plug those dietary gaps with a multivitamin and a multimineral.
OK. And when you say keep hydrated, what are we talking about?
So, you know, it depends, something like 2 litres of water a day, but, you know, you're aiming for clear urine, basically, and there's no hard and fast rule.
OK, writing all of these down while you're telling me. And as far as you said, as hot flushes are concerned, how do we deal with those?
Generally, it's medical treatment that you're looking at for hot flushes. So we don't have enough evidence to suggest that vitamins and minerals would target hot flushes. But I think if you're looking to improve your health holistically, exercising, staying hydrated, keeping those nutrients up, then that will help with your general health. With hot flushes, really, you're looking at medical treatment.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to have to tell you this, ladies, but you need to stay away from the booze as well, don't you?
Absolutely. So stay away from smoking, cut down on your alcohol levels, minimal levels of salt and sugar. All of those things will help with your overall health.
OK, and as a GP, just before I let you go, I've come back with the conference cold. It's a well-known thing, lots of people in a concentrated area, but it's that season, isn't it? And people who've not yet had their flu jab?
Oh, please have your flu jab. It's absolutely key to protect you and others around you. So, you know, it's been around for ages. It's really safe. It will protect you. It will protect others. So absolutely have the flu jab.
OK, it's good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed, Doctor. Come back.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bear with me 1 second, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you, because I just want to tell people about the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The weekend looking unseasonably warm, but the next couple of days will be cooler with rain in the north and west, mostly mild, although chilly in the northeast. But rain over Ireland and Northern Ireland is spreading into northwestern Britain. That rain will spread to all but South Wales and central, southern and eastern England this very morning, while the northwestern half of Ireland will dry up. Temperatures will be like yesterday's, but with a strengthening wind.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Going to be 29 degrees this weekend, apparently, and I can't do the conversion into old money, but I think that's something like 28.82 in the 80s. I think I'm right in saying. Mari is here. I'm not going to test you on that particular one, but what I am...
Useless with Fahrenheit, Kay, I wouldn't have a clue.
Old money. But tell me what you thought generally of conference and what we're expecting for next week.
So generally, my impression of conference was actually kind of surprisingly positive. I spoke to a lot of Tory MPs who weren't as downbeat as I expected them to be. They were relatively happy with what was going on. They weren't too worried about the net zero turnaround. A lot of them weren't too worried about HS2 either. Andy Street did not resign. We saw Rishi Sunak kind of calling out to Andy, basically, stay with me, stay with me.
As they call it, a shout out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, therefore, to an extent, it could be branded as a bit of a success for Rishi Sunak. The real question is, how revolutionary were some of those policy announcements? A lot of them are not necessarily going to come in anytime soon. The rail infrastructure, education, these things take a long, long time. He may not be in power by then to see them through. What will be interesting for the Labour conference this weekend is where they will stand on HS2. That is a really, really key question for Keir Starmer. And if they want to reinstate it, how will they pay for it? Because they say they're going to keep to fiscal rules.
And why did you get involved? I was going to call it the gender card, but apparently gender and sex are different, according to the Transport Secretary this morning. So why did he play the sex card?
Well, I think Rishi Sunak wants to have that fight with Labour because they feel that Labour is weak when it comes to trans issues. There's been a lot of confusion and changing of positions from the Labour Party around trans rights and gender issues. Annalise Dodds has been known to be on the airwaves saying one thing, changing her perspective on another. And I think that the Labour Party really need to make sure, if they want to be clear on this, that they have a stance and then they can stick to it.
What else do they need to do next week?
They also need to decide whether they're going to bring the fight to the Tories on things like immigration. The Tories actually feel they're quite strong on immigration. Rishi Sunak's in Spain today talking more about immigration with European partners. So they need to find a way to still push back on immigration. That is seen as quite strong ground for the Tories, especially with the speech that we saw from Suella Braverman talking about hurricanes of migrants coming in. So how will Labour respond to that, or will they end up coming across as slightly soft on immigration, which is a danger for the Labour?
Are they going to give us any policy? Because every time I ask, they always say, well, whoever's here on the sofa, where you're sat, always say, we need to see the numbers.
Exactly. They always say we need to see the numbers, we need to wait to see what the government is doing first. Now, they have no excuse this time because normally Labour is first, but instead Labour is after the Tories, and therefore they do have the government's position on certain issues, and therefore they can make decisions. So hopefully we'll see some quite juicy policy announcements.
OK, for now, thanks very much, indeed. We're going up together on Sunday, aren't we? And we'll be there all week. Coming up in the next few moments here on Sky, it's been the hottest June on record, the hottest July on record, the hottest August on record, the hottest September on record. So we're going to be talking about that in more detail with our climate show presenter Tom Heat coming up in just a few moments' time with Wilfred here on Sky News. As I said, we'll be live from 7 o'clock on Monday morning. See you then. Do hope so. Bye for now.